Chapter 1701. After Zhang Yan used the imperial seal of Xian Yuan, he found that the circulation of his magic power and the casting of spells became incomparably smooth. Even the recovery of his energy seemed to have faintly increased. He could also feel that the longer this treasure was used, the greater the benefits the master would gain. Under the power of this treasure, all things could only obey its nature. This could be said in one sentence, and that was, the strong become stronger, the weak become weaker. It was fortunate that he had taken the treasure. If this dragged on, even if the heaven-combining snake hoop could be used again, under its influence, he might not be able to kill Lu Li so easily. The only pity was that he had just obtained this treasure and had not refined it yet. As a result, many of the benefits were taken away by the treasure itself, and there was not much that landed on him. But no matter what, with this item in hand, he had immediately turned the situation around. At this moment, whether to advance or retreat, it was all within his control, and he was no longer restricted by the enemy. At this moment, Lu Li stood in the formation, his body glowing. He chanted scriptures, and the page in his divine will faintly glowed, using this to resist the omnipresent pressure outside. Right now, he had no way to retreat, because the formation was originally obtained by borrowing the imperial seal of Xian Yuan. Once this treasure was in Zhang Yan's hands, the right to control it was naturally taken along with it. In other words, he was already trapped here. Next, he had to either defeat the opponent in front of him, or think of a way to retreat. If he could not do either, then he could only hope that his energy was enough to last until the battle ended and Bai Wei and the others came to his rescue. Because he had already used the 3 great curses he knew, they were not able to do anything to the opponent. Right now, the only thing that could succeed was the fundamental curse. But after thinking about it, he finally decided to suppress it. The 4 great fundamental curses were divided into the 4 branches of Heng, stop, transform, and purify. The one he knew was the purify curse, and although its killing power was not weak, it was a level lower than the transform curse. Even if it landed, it could not immediately do anything to the opponent, so this path could not be taken. When he thought of this, he felt slightly helpless. His purpose for coming here was to disrupt the human Dao Yuan Zun's arrangements, but he did not expect the other party's methods to be unexpectedly brilliant. Not only did they block him here, they even took away a Dao artifact. In reality, at this point, he could no longer achieve his original goal. He could only try to protect himself and see if there was a chance for him to retreat. Dan Yi and the other 2 had been paying close attention to the battle, and when they saw Zhang Yan snatching the imperial edict of Xian Yuan into his hands and turning the situation around, trapping the enemy in the formation, they were greatly inspired. Michihito Ichito praised him several times. If they were to ignore the Tai golden bead, the reason why they were inferior to the Khanate demon was undoubtedly because of the Dao artifact. Now that they had one, although it didn't mean that they had a chance of winning, they at least had some confidence. Actually, all of them were clearly aware that according to normal circumstances, they would probably lose this battle. However, they had no choice but to do this because if they missed this opportunity, then their chances of turning the situation around in the future would be even slimmer. However, Zhang Yan's actions made them see some hope. Danny said, with fellow Taoist Zhang here, there's nothing to worry about in the outside world. It's just that we don't know when the 3 demons will arrive. We should refine the formation's magic treasure as soon as possible to deal with them. Michihito Ichito also said, that's right, there is still a great enemy behind us. Taoist Zhang, there is no way out now. We need to quickly set up the second formation to prevent any unforeseen events. Fu Qingming pondered and said, although the 5 arrays from before were simple to set up, it seems like they are really useful. At the very least, they managed to delay that demon. After the Dharma treasures here are refined, I can set up a few more outside. The other 2 nodded in agreement. At this moment, Zhang Yan was constantly visualizing the sword light in his spirit. Under the illumination of the seal's spiritual light, the flying sword slashed and slashed as he wished. After using it many times, he even gained some enlightenment. However, the opponent in front of him was the complete opposite. Compared to before, he was much slower and always looked like he was a beat slower. This was because he had to use a part of his strength to defend against the Dharma treasure that was hanging above him. However, he realized that the chi activity of this guy did not decrease at all. It was obvious that killing him twice was far from his limit. He laughed lightly. It was rare to have such an opponent as a sparring partner. It was a good chance for him to test out his skills. Even if his vitality was really inexhaustible and he could not kill him, he had achieved his goal of delaying the battle. Not long after, Lu Li found that it was getting more and more difficult to deal with. He knew that staying here would not only put him at a disadvantage, but he would also not be able to pressure his opponent. Therefore, he began to look for ways to retreat. He kept creating clones of his mind to calculate a way out of the formation. However, every time they appeared, they would be killed by a ray of sword light. However, even if they only appeared for a moment, they would help him in his calculations. At the very least, it would consume some of his vitality. As for using insects to break the formation with the seal above him, even if he released them, they wouldn't listen to him, so he decided not to use them. Soon, 2 years passed while the two sides were fighting. In the depths of the inner realm, the elephant dragon gold furnace in front of Dan Yi and the other two suddenly shook. Smoke spewed out and rays of colorful light flew out. In the end, it became a colorful ball of light that was extremely dazzling. Michihito Ichito reached out and took it. To his surprise, he felt that it was a bit heavy. He couldn't help but feel happy and said, "It's done." In fact, at the realm of true yang, no matter what it was in his hand, it would not feel heavy. However, it could make him feel heavy. This was because he had broken away from a certain kind of restraint. It was a restraint of its own and it was not affected by the aura of the three of them. This thing was not a treasure, but it could be used to stabilize the formation. He took it and looked at it several times until he was sure that there were no flaws in it. Then he said, "I didn't wait in vain." Danny said, "Brother E, why don't you go ahead and set it up first? We will come after we refine our artifacts." Because the sacrificial refinement was not a magical treasure used for battle, the golden furnace was currently refining several objects together. However, it was not without an upper limit. This treasure had 8 mouths, each facing different directions. This meant that it could refine a maximum of 8 objects at the same time. Taoist E nodded solemnly, then cupped his fists and said, "I'll be going first." He changed his mind, and in an instant he came to an empty space. He saw tens of thousands of stars flashing around him, and they were arranged neatly. This formation had been arranged long ago. Now it was just lacking a treasure to suppress it. He threw the ball of light out. Immediately, there was a chi dynamic that affected the stars. Every star was originally independent, but when the chi landed, they connected with each other and became a whole. He urged in his heart again, and the formation immediately started to move. At the same time, it produced waves of invisible Wei that shook the void. At this moment, this formation could be considered complete just now. He glanced outside and saw that Zhang Yan could handle the situation there. Even if he went up, he wouldn't be of much help. He might as well make use of the time he had to set up a few more formations to fight against the demons that were about to arrive. With this thought in mind, he sent a message to the 3 of them with his divine will and flew into the sky again. In the formation, Zhang Yan's body was surrounded by mysterious light. There were countless rays of sword light flying around, constantly slashing at Lu Li's Dharmakaya. However, the latter had used his own foundation to vaguely find the way out in the past few years. During this period of time, he naturally could not let the other party plot against him, so he changed the formation every time. It was quite impressive that the demon could still find the right way under such circumstances. Until now, including the previous 2 times, he had killed this demon no less than 7 times. However, after each time, the demon would immediately return, and it was full of vitality, seemingly unharmed. However, he did not stop because of this. Instead, he used this opportunity to understand the changes in the Dharma. As he killed this demon over and over again, his understanding of this secret method was improving at an unimaginable speed. Since the beginning of the world, there was probably no true yang cultivator who had been killed so many times by his peers. Even the mighty who possessed the mysterious painting back then had never experienced such an experience. He was using this demon as a test to complete his dharma. On Lu Li's side, he was also learning something in the cycle of life and death. However, there was one difference. Every time he turned back, that part of his consciousness would disappear along with his body. This meant that that part of his existence was completely gone. Therefore, as long as the mysterious painting was with him, he could not transcend it and understand the true consciousness. Although he felt that he had gained something, in the end, he still gained nothing. In fact, if it was just his own vitality, it would probably be exhausted after being killed 2 or 3 times. However, there was the endless vitality of Bai Wei and the other 2 outside. Not only that, there was also the contribution of the 9 transformations Green Reverend, so he did not have to worry about the lack of vitality. This was because the 3 of them had given him some of their own vitality. However, because it was constantly recovering, the loss of vitality was actually not as much as he had imagined. If this situation did not change, then it would not be a problem for him to hold on for dozens or even hundreds of years. At this moment, Lu Li suddenly opened his eyes. Finally, he found the path in the formation. Without any hesitation, he made up his mind and dashed towards that direction. In an instant, he landed in the 4th formation. However, at this moment, countless rays of sword light pierced into his Dharma body and were cutting away at his vitality. It was different from what he saw at the beginning. The rays of sword light were sharper and more difficult to deal with. He could feel that, in the non-stop sparring, Zhang Yan's strength was continuously increasing, and he was becoming more and more skilled in the battle. However, what was more troublesome was that imperial seal of Xian Yuan. This item was weakening his qi at every moment. Although it was only a tiny bit and did not affect him much, but when fighting against someone of the same generation, even the slightest bit of disharmony could cause a great deviation. Therefore, after thinking about it, it was already very difficult for him to turn the situation around. The only thing he could do was to endure these dozens of years until Bai Wei and the others arrived. Just now, he could break out of this situation. Chapter 1702. The battle between Zhang Yan and Lu Li went on without rest. Before they knew it, dozens of years had passed. Dan Yi and the others also made use of the time he had won to use all methods to refine artifacts and set up restrictive formations. Compared to how it was in the beginning, it could be said that the world had changed drastically. However, as long as all the demons did not arrive together, they would not stop. They would continue to set up. However, a few years ago, they felt 2 shaken senses in succession. They knew that 2 Yuanzun had died one after another. At this moment, only the last Yuanzun was holding on by himself. However, with his strength alone, it was obvious that he could not hold on for much longer. Danger was coming. At this moment, Lu Li had already retreated to the 1st formation. He thought that he should be able to escape very quickly, but in the last formation, he could not find the correct way out no matter what. This was because every time he calculated the path, there would always be some inexplicable changes in the formation. He guessed that this was probably not just because his opponents kept changing formations. Perhaps it was also because of the influence of the imperial seal of Xian Yuan, causing his calculations to be slightly off. That was why it was difficult for him to do as he wished. While he was still calculating, he suddenly felt something in his heart. His eyes lit up, and his expression became slightly more relaxed. He raised his head and said, "Fellow Taoist, we've been fighting for a long time, but you can't kill me. Why don't you stop and listen to what I have to say?" Zhang Yan's eyes were cold. Just now, he also felt that if there were no accidents, it should be the last human Dao Yuanzun who had died. Needless to say, the 3 Khanate demons would definitely rush here after their battle there. However, they did not speak to this demon. They took out a spell and killed him again in an instant. In just a moment, Lu Li came back to life again. He shook his head and said, "Looks like someone else will have to speak to you." Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly. He did not attack again. Instead, he looked outside and saw a white-robed Taoist appear outside the formation. He sat on a 5-tusked white elephant with golden threads circling his back. His sleeves fluttered like clouds and he looked handsome. Lu Li said, "This is Heavenly Lord Guangxing. He has cultivated for the longest time among us, and his cultivation is also the highest." The white-robed Taoist smiled and said, "In front of everyone's human Dao Yuan Zun, there is no need to mention the name of Heavenly Lord." He bowed to Zhang Yan and said, "My name is Bai Wei. May I ask how I should address you, my friend?" After observing for a moment, Zhang Yan could sense that this person did not have any aura. At this moment, the one standing there was only a shadow, and not a clone or the main body. Dan Yi's voice sounded in his ears. "Why don't you listen to what this demon has to say first? If he can buy us some time, we can make more arrangements." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. Then, with a move of his qi, an avatar appeared outside the formation. He even bowed and said, "I Zhang Yan, what do you have to say?" Because Bai Wei and the others were connected to Lu Li's divine will, they could have known what was happening here. However, they were trapped by Chen Chan's art of obscurity, and their senses could not reach the outside world. Only after killing Lu Lin and the other three and breaking out of the technique did they understand the whole story. The three of them were also very wary of Zhang Yan's ability to kill a true young mighty figure in an instant. After all, there was only one mysterious beginning Yang mirror painting, and they were not Lu Li. If they were killed, there was no way for them to come back. However, it was not difficult for them to determine that this technique was related to qi. If the two sides had never come into contact, it would be impossible. Otherwise, Zhang Yan could have found them and killed them from a distance. After discussing, they believed that as long as they concealed themselves, they would be fine. Of course, if they were to fight face to face, they would definitely be exposed, and they could only rely on their own secret techniques to evade. Because their previous evasive techniques had been proven useless, they prepared to deduce a few techniques and only attacked when they were prepared. Therefore, they did not attack immediately. At this time, Bai Wei's avatar came ahead of time, but he had another intention. He said, "As far as I know, you seem to have another inheritance and did not cultivate in Busu Heaven. Why do you need to stand up for those cultivators in Busu Heaven?" Zhang Yan replied in a serious tone, "Although I did not cultivate in Busu Heaven, I am still a cultivator of humanity. I have inherited the supreme techniques, and I also have disciples, teachers, and friends. If you want to destroy my humanity, how can I stand aside and do nothing?" Bai smiled and said, "You are too stubborn." He pointed to his chest and said, "Humanity and other Daos are all determined by my heart. It is not that demons cannot be humans, it is not that demons do not need to be humans. If you are willing to retreat, I can make the decision today. I will not make things difficult for any of your disciples. I only need you to study the profound principles and recite the true techniques together with me." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Listening to your words, it seems that you have already won this battle?" Bai smiled and said, "We have the primordial cardinal treasure, Tai Golden Pearl. In our hands, it is impossible for us to lose. Lu, Yuan Zun and the other two's cultivation and mana are not below yours and the other exalted ones. But now that they are dead, why do you still want to get involved with them?" Zhang Yan's gaze became deeper and said, "Since you are a villain of humanity, why are you saying this to I?" Bai Wei said, "I and Busa Heaven and the original Yuan Zun have been at odds for a long time. I can no longer let go of the past grudges. Naturally, I should settle the karma in this changing world. Since you and I have no grudges, why do we need to fight? If we can avoid a dispute, it will be a happy ending for everyone." Although they deeply hated the cultivators of humanity for cutting off their path of advancement, no matter what, they had all cultivated under a powerful person of humanity. This was something that could not be washed away. Therefore, if they did not kill humanity and cut off the karma, it would be difficult to establish the fundamental sutra in the future. Moreover, Zhang Yan did not cultivate under Busa Heaven. Moreover, they had deduced that this person had nothing to do with the Yuan Zun of humanity they knew in the past. Most importantly, Zhang Yan's combat ability was strong, and his method of killing Zhen Yang was even more mysterious. Even if they had the confidence to win, they would probably have to pay a huge price. It would be best if they could reason with him and rope him in. As long as Zhang Yan was willing to give up his original cultivation method and even give up his identity as a cultivator of humanity to study the Fundamental Sutra, then they would be happy to accept. After all, the Fundamental Sutra would be comprehended by another powerful person, and it would be closer to the path. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he said, "I wonder what method you are talking about?" Bai Wei smiled and said, "I have the Supreme Fundamental Sutra. It is called the Fundamental Sutra. This method can be used to comprehend the path and the mysteries. If you are really interested, I can take it out right now and let you read it." Zhang Yan made an oh sound and said, "Can I browse through it without entering your sect's walls?" Bai Wei bowed and sighed. In the past, when we cultivated, there were obstacles and we deeply felt that cultivation was not easy. The cultivators of the upper realm all treasured the secret method and were not willing to teach it easily. As a result, the people of the world could not enter the door of Tao. Therefore, when we achieved success, we made a wish that we should build a wonderful realm in Busa Heaven. If the people of the world entered our Tao, they would be able to see all the methods and obtain all kinds of fate. Although his voice was calm as he spoke, it gradually became louder and louder. It shook people's hearts as if there was great mana contained in it. Within the primordial sea in the void, it was unknown how many living beings heard this, and they all bowed and kowtowed. Their hearts trembled and they shed tears of gratitude. Zhang Yan looked on coldly and did not stop him. Influencing all living beings was just a small Tao, but he could discern the true intention from this, and this was also what the other party wanted him to see. Bai Wei flipped his wrist and a golden page appeared in his hand. He said seriously, "If you are willing to come over, you will naturally not be wronged to be under us. You will naturally be on the same level as the four of us and have the same name for all ages. In the future, if you can open another Fundamental Sutra, you will be given a title, set up a Tao altar, and start a sect." As he spoke, he pushed outwards and the golden page floated over. He was not afraid that Zhang Yan would know what was written on it. Giving the scripture to others to read was also a method of enlightenment. The more one wanted to find a way to restrain them, the deeper one would sink into it. This was because when you do such a thing, you must have already acknowledged the method. If you didn't acknowledge it, then there was no point in talking about it. However, merely reading the incantations on the scriptures was useless. This required perseverance in visualization and constant chanting. Only by harmonizing with the divine will and heart consciousness would one be able to display its power. This was not something that could be achieved in a hurry. Also, this Tao method was created by the four of them. From this point of view, it was impossible for someone to use this method to defeat them. Instead, they hoped that someone would use this method to enter the Tao. Zhang Yan saw the golden page arrive before him, but he didn't even look at it. He waved his sleeve and threw it to the side, revealing a decisive look. Bai Wei's expression didn't change. He only regretfully said, "Since you are unwilling, then we can only fight." After he finished speaking, he bowed and disappeared. Zhang Yan didn't pay any attention to him. He was still trapped here, and with a thought, he sent an avatar into the depths of the inner realm. Dan Yi and the other two stood there, their expressions incomparably solemn. Zhang Yan raised his eyes and said, "Fellow Taoists, you must have heard my conversation with Bai Wei. He will arrive shortly." Michihito Ichido coldly said, "We have been waiting for them for a long time." Danny nodded and said, "Lu Lin and the others have already entered meditation. Only a few of us are left. No matter what, we must protect the human Tao." Fu Qingming pondered a bit and said, "Everyone, if this battle is disadvantageous, I can stay behind to cover the retreat." He had the body of a Tao god. As long as his possession method wasn't destroyed, he couldn't be killed. At most, he could only be suppressed. Of course, this was dangerous. If everyone asked him, he might not be able to protect himself. If he was still in the enemy's hands, then there would be no chance of survival. Zhang Yan waved his hand instead to draw the victorious heavenly vessel over, and he said, "This vessel was refined from the unfettered wood that I obtained by chance, and it's capable of traversing space and avoiding tribulations. Everyone can plant a strand of vital energy within it, And if it's at the last moment, all of you can ride this vessel to flee into space and wait for an opportunity. They had made all the preparations they could, but aside from the Tao treasure, the demons also had the Tai golden bead. No one knew what the battle would be like, so they could only prepare for the worst. As the four of them spoke, they suddenly heard rumbling outside. The void trembled and the world changed colors. The four of them knew that this person had arrived. Chapter 1703. Just as heaven and earth were shaking, there was a flash of light in the sky. Suddenly, something fell from the sky, and as if it had identified the direction, it fell towards the formation below. The four people in the formation saw clearly that it was the spiritual world Rui. Dan Yi's spirit was lifted, and he looked at Zhang Yan. Among us, fellow Taoist Zhang has the highest spiritual power, so please take it. Zhang Yan didn't decline. With a thought, he used his qi to guide it, and the treasure was very obedient. It immediately turned into a spiritual rainbow and flew into his hand. He picked it up and saw that it was a warm jade Rui. The head was raised with cloud patterns, and the neck was like a goose's neck. From head to tail, it was about the length of half an arm. At the end of the handle, there was a red tassel, and it was tied with a string of colorful jade beads. When he held it in his hand, there was a dense mist around it, and there was the sound of the beads touching each other. Dan Yi transmitted a message with his spirit. This treasure changes according to the person. It is said that only the person who truly wields it can see its true appearance. Michihito Ichido was surprised. There is someone who truly wields this treasure? Danny wasn't sure. It is only a rumor, but the person who wielded this treasure didn't deny this rumor. Zhang Yan could feel that this treasure was probably the easiest Tao tool to control. It didn't need anyone to refine it, and the moment his qi entered it, it would be smooth and unimpeded. However, he also knew that it was extremely difficult to control this treasure well. If one's wish was too great, then the treasure would ignore one and one's origin qi would be wasted for nothing. However, if one's wish was too small, then even if it could be achieved, the effect would be limited. Wasting one's origin qi was still a small matter. Not only would one not be able to achieve one's goal, but one would also have to return the treasure to the opponent. That would not be worth it. Therefore, to use it well, one had to grasp this line. Before this, they had already agreed on how to use this treasure, but when they actually took it, they had a different feeling. He raised his head and said, "Everyone, I think that if we use the method we discussed earlier, we might not be able to get what we want." Dan Yi hurriedly asked, "Did you sense something?" Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "We might have misunderstood earlier. This treasure can be entrusted with the power of will, but it doesn't just depend on the size of the matter, it also depends on the direction of the person's heart. We have discussed this for a long time, and our hearts are filled with anticipation. It can be said that we have put too much effort into it. If we entrust it with the power of will, there is an 80 to 90% chance that it will not work." The three of them were stunned. Obviously, they hadn't expected that there was actually such a reason. In fact, they'd prepared a few methods to deal with different situations, but it seemed like none of them would work. Michihito Ichido asked, "Then what do you think we should do?" Zhang Yan pondered for a while. It turned out that what they lacked was a treasure that could suppress the formation, so they wanted to use it to make a wish. Since that didn't work, then they could only try another way. He said, "Since there's no way to suppress the formation, then we can make a wish. We just need to disturb the other party's qi activity. This will also achieve our goal, and it's not a big wish." The three of them discussed for a while and felt that this suggestion was acceptable. Danny said, "But Taoist friend, you can take a step back first. If I touch this item, it will definitely fall into the hands of the demons, and they will use it against us. Since we can't gain much from it now, then we'd rather hold it in our hands and observe the situation." Zhang Yan agreed with this. Seeing the enemy's methods before making arrangements was also a good way to deal with it. Moreover, it wasn't like they didn't have the power to fight back now. At least they still had the imperial seal of first origin that they could use. Once this was settled, the four of them retreated from the spirit's will. Just now, they had a lot to talk about, but in the outside world, only a moment had passed. At this moment, The region was shaking even more violently. It was a sign that a great whaley was about to arrive. After a short while, a brilliant golden light that almost covered the entire world descended. Its speed wasn't fast, but wherever it passed, everything seemed to be merged into it and disappeared. Zhang Yan could sense that this light was formed by an incantation, but it wasn't like Bai Wei's so-called fundamental incantation. It was just that the power contained in it was immense. However, no matter how much more powerful this mana was, the four of them would be able to withstand it. Whether this was a show of force or some other purpose, they still couldn't see it clearly. However, there might be some hidden tricks in it. Therefore, after thinking about it, they didn't take it head-on, but decided to activate the formation to receive it. This way, the formation might be slightly exposed, but they could avoid direct contact. Even if there was anything, there would be room to turn things around. He discussed with the three of them in the spirit's will, and they decided to activate the 5 formations in front of them to receive this collision. Now, the 5 formations were not the same as when he first set them up. After repeated battles with Lu Li, they had already changed. Not only did they conceal their own chi activity, but they also had the imperial seal of first origin on them. Their endurance was not just a little bit stronger. The 5 formations were activated at the same time. As the golden light shone in, it was moved into the void layer by layer, and nothing else was damaged. Lu Li had been trapped here all this time. Seeing that the formation only cared about external forces, there seemed to be a loophole to exploit. He wanted to take this chance to get out, but after talking with the three of them in the spirit's will, he stayed in the formation. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. He saw everything this person did. Because he couldn't really kill this person, he purposely opened the door just now to see what choice he would make. But he could leave, but he acted as if he didn't see anything. From this, it could be seen that the 3 demons had some kind of plan, and they wanted to achieve it through Lu Li. The golden light couldn't break through the 5 gates, and after a long time, it retracted. However, after a moment, the 4 of them suddenly felt that the world shook. This was not the place where they were standing, but the entire void seemed to be shaking. Then, a yellow-skinned gourd appeared in the void, reflecting the beauty of mountains and rivers, the essence of all living things. It was like a painting in thick ink, but also like it was created naturally. It was glossy and glistening, rippling shadows. A leaf hung down from the stem, like a crown, swaying there, and there was a thumping sound that penetrated into their hearts. Michihito Ichido had been standing in the star formation that he had set up, ready to make a second layer of protection if something went wrong. At this moment, when he saw this item, he recognized that it was the heaven and earth upside-down gourd. At this moment, the coiling throat in his hand trembled faintly, and he knew that something was wrong. At this moment, he didn't dare to care about his mana, and hurriedly picked up the treasure to calculate. The result made his expression change, and he said with a thought, "Quick, everyone must think of a way to withstand the power of this magic treasure." The 3 of them could feel the anxious thought transmitted from him. Without hesitation, Zhang Yan immediately activated the glazed lotus cup and placed it above the formation. Dan Yi also activated the natural golden lotus, just in case. Fu Qingming also held an item in his hand, but it looked blurry and difficult to identify. The gourd only shook there a few times, and everyone actually felt the world was spinning, and the qi in their body seemed to be stagnant for a while, and the next moment, it became scattered in all directions as if it was no longer under their control. Zhang Yan steadied his mind to resist this power and quickly stabilized his qi. At the same time, he could see that the glazed lotus petal was slowly dyed with a layer of murky black, and it occupied the empty space at an unprecedented speed. He glanced at the yellow-skinned gourd, and at this moment he couldn't see its master, and only the power of the Tao instrument came through the air, and it couldn't accurately land on one person. The power was destined to be scattered, and so what they experienced at this moment was only the remnant power. But don't forget that there was actually a part of the power that was blocked by the glazed lotus cup, and so it seemed that the power of this treasure was unexpectedly strong. At this moment, Michihito Ichido also reminded, "With the coiling throat, I can roughly guess that this person hasn't pushed the power of this treasure to the extreme, so we must be careful later." Fu Qingming looked at the sky, and thought for a while before saying, "It seems that the power of the demon is above our deduction." Dan Yi's expression was firm, and he said, "We have prepared for a long time just to fight with this person. If we can't even survive this round, then we can forget about defeating the enemy." Zhang Yan sensed for a moment, but he couldn't sense the people's qi. It was obvious that the few demons weren't here, and only this Dao instrument was thrown over. However, this Dao instrument was different from the imperial seal of Xianyuan. It had been refined for a long time, and their minds were already connected, so it was impossible for them to snatch it. He thought to himself, this person didn't appear at this moment, probably because he was guarding against his art of killing. If it was a normal battle, he could still take the initiative to go up to them, but at this moment, to defend against the Dao instrument, he could only stand in the formation and wait for them to come up to him. The truth was as he guessed, the three Khanate demons were worried about his art of killing, and were afraid that their qi would be exposed, so they hid at the side, and didn't appear in front of the formation. They only controlled the Dao instrument from afar, and this was both a test and a pressure. Dai Gong said, "Guangxing Heavenly Lord, this person seems to have dealt with it." Bai Wei said casually, "We haven't caught the qi of the people Dao Yuan Zun, and we don't know where he is, so we can't take him down easily." Dai Gong said, "Then it's up to Heavenly Venerable Ji Guan. I've already told him the method of evading that I deduced. If we can lure that Taoist Zhang to use that killing method, even if we can't evade it, we can still find a way." Back then, when Zhang Yan used that technique, they were unable to sense it within the art of fusion, so they did not know exactly what technique it was. Now that they had come out, if they could observe it once, they would be able to find the method to break it. Bai Wei shook his head, that Taoist Zhang might not fall for it, just now that we used the Golden Sun incantation to enter, but he didn't leak any qi, so I can't find his exact location. This shows how cautious he is, so we don't have to count on it. Dai Gong said, "Guangxing Heavenly Lord, what do you want to do?" Bai Wei looked at the heaven and earth upside-down gourd, and his eyes shone brightly, and he said confidently, "We have the Dao instrument in our hands, so it's enough." 1,000,000 years ago, when this treasure fell into his hands, he could only use it roughly, but unexpectedly, this treasure was very compatible with him, and after the battle with Lu Lin and the others just now, he gained even more, and he almost dug out all the potential in it. Not only him, but the others also felt the same. He said, "Chingon Heavenly Lord, it's time for you to make your move." Dai Gong nodded, and with a shake of his sleeve, spiritual light appeared, and a long bell sound echoed in the void. Chapter 1704. The four people in the formation also heard the sound of the bell. It felt as if the sound came from the 9 heavens, and even through the formation, it was extremely clear. Zhang Yan looked up and saw a golden bell hanging in the sky. The top of the bell was connected to the blue sky, and the bottom covered the dark sky. The bell wall was engraved with the images of all things, and around the rim of the bell, there were auspicious clouds and auspicious mist. When Dan Yi saw this item, he immediately warned, "Everyone, this is the Lu Yuan Golden Bell. Once the bell rings, our auras need to move according to it. If we go against it, it will immediately catch our auras and suppress us. You must be careful." He had already told everyone about the power of this magic treasure, but he had only heard about its general power. This was the first time he had experienced it, so out of caution, he specially warned them. Zhang Yan steadied his mind. He could feel that as the sound rang out, the aura of this treasure burst forth, and at the same time, a unique rhythm appeared. In just a few breaths of time, it changed over a dozen times. Sometimes it was gentle, sometimes it was gentle, sometimes it was grand, sometimes it was surging, sometimes it was high, sometimes it was low, and so on and so forth. It was like a tune, but hidden within it was endless killing intent. He circulated his own aura and followed it. Although there were many changes, he did not make a single mistake. But he knew that he could endure it now, but it would be different when he was in battle. Think about it, you were clearly on the offensive, but the bell told you to be quiet and not to act rashly, so you could only endure it. You were clearly trying to defend, but the bell told you to attack, so you had to fight with your life on the line. This put you in an extremely passive position. Fortunately, The sound did not distinguish between friend and foe. The master also had to follow it, or else he would be suppressed by the treasure. But there was one thing that the master would know in advance what would happen. This was actually according to his thoughts, and if he could be a step ahead and be prepared, he would always be able to take the initiative. At this moment, he looked elsewhere and saw that Dan E and the other two had serious expressions. If they were only facing one magic treasure alone, as long as they focused, it would not be difficult for a true young cultivator. However, one had to know that at this moment, they were still under the envelopment of the heaven and earth upside-down gourd. It would be difficult for them to prevent their origin chi from being affected by the gourd and to follow the sound of the alloy bell. Not to mention that the other party had not fully activated the power of the magic treasure. One could imagine that they had to endure for a long time without any mistakes. This was undoubtedly a test for them. After Fu Qingming held on for a long time, he frowned. He had the body of a Tao god, so he wasn't afraid of most other treasures. However, if he wasn't careful and didn't conform to the sound of the bell, he might be suppressed. Hence, he was especially afraid of this treasure. As Dan E adjusted his essence, he said, "The person behind the scenes has not appeared, but we can still withstand this kind of attack for the time being. I am afraid that there will be more variables here." Michihito Ichido held the disc and calculated, then shook his head and said, "Now that the universe has been turned upside down, the heavenly secrets are dark and unclear. The future is already difficult to predict, but it is not that we have no way to deal with it. I can use the Rainbow Lotus Cup to help. If it is still not enough, we can still use the Spirit World Rui." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment, but did not agree. He said, "That's not appropriate. The other side should know that the Spirit World Rui is in my hands, so it is impossible for them not to make preparations. They are probably waiting for me to take out this Tao artifact. We must not do what the opponent wants." Michihito Ichido asked, "Fellow Zhang, do you have any ideas?" Zhang Yan had another thought, and after a moment he said, "Everyone, please wait a moment, I might be able to give it a try." He recited the incantation in his heart, slowly washing away the turbid air in the glazed lotus flower cup. He did not care about the Luyuan golden bell, but focused on bearing the power of the heaven and earth inverted gourd, because this treasure could at most bear the pressure of one enchanted treasure at the same time, otherwise the turbid air would not be washed away in time. Other than this item, there were two other enchanted treasures here that could not be ignored. The primordial imperial seal could reduce the unfavorable situation, and the God-shaking heavenly scroll could even weaken the connection between the master and the enchanted treasure. As long as they were used, they could save the situation. Logically speaking, there were 4 of them here, so they could divide and control. However, there was a problem here. These few treasures had always been in his hands, and after tens of years of using them, he was already very familiar with them, and he even knew many of the key points. If he were to send them to the hands of Dan E and the rest, it would not be a problem under normal circumstances, but now under the influence of the bell, he still had to unleash the power of these enchanted treasures, so there might be some problems. After pondering for a while, he decided that it would be better for him to do this alone. Thus, with a thought, he instantly created several magic power clones. Each clone was holding a treasure, but he was controlling 3 treasures at the same time. Doing this consumed a lot of chi of vitality, but fortunately, he had a strong foundation and was able to withstand it. There was still a problem here. The Tao treasures were not directly controlled by the original owner, so if the demon were to attack, there was a chance to snatch it away. However, he deliberately placed this flaw here. As long as this person dared to show himself, the chi dynamic would definitely be exposed, and then he could directly use the secret method to try and kill him. However, the 3 enchanted treasures hovered in the sky at the same time, and layers of clear light spread out, blocking the sound, shaking the spiritual vigor, and immediately alleviating the urgent situation. Dan E and the rest immediately felt the pressure on them lighten, and when they focused, they saw that Zhang Yan was controlling the 3 treasures, and each incarnation's chi dynamic changed according to the sound of the bell, displaying a very exquisite control of chi. They secretly praised, and temporarily put down the enchanted treasures in their hands, slightly adjusted their breathing, and prepared to provide support at the critical moment. The three fiendish demons had also sensed the changes here. Dai Gong looked from afar and said playfully, "Guangxing Heavenly Lord, the other party seems to be using a few enchanted treasures to block, but the spiritual light seems to be muddy, as if Master only used a layer of strength. Looking at this, isn't he afraid that we will snatch it away?" Bai Wei said, "Perhaps this person wants me to do so." Dai Gong also nodded. Before he tested out the mysterious method, he would definitely not easily go forward. Bai Wei looked for a moment and said, "Looking at the situation, although this person did not use all his strength, it doesn't look easy either. Miao Xing Heavenly Lord, Xing and Heavenly Lord, we can use some more strength. Under this pressure, they will no longer have to worry about anything else. Then it will be easier for Miao Xing Heavenly Lord to act." Qian Luo and Dai Gong both responded, and used their strength one after another, forcibly pulling the enchanted treasures up another layer. After the two sides began to collide, Lu Li stayed in the formation and did not go out. Although the heaven and earth upside-down gourd could avoid him under Qian Luo's instructions, LV Yuan and the Golden Bell also had to withstand it, and they also needed to adjust their qi from time to time. But overall, the pressure he felt was slightly less than Dan Yi and the rest. At this time, he received Bai Wei's message, and it was to try to enter the depths of the formation. It would be best if he directly fought with the four of them, causing them to reveal their qi dynamic, then the power of the enchanted treasures could directly fall on them. With a thought, he tried to enter the depths of the formation. At this time, Zhang Yan suddenly felt the pressure above him increase for a long time, and when he was about to add a bit more magic power, Michihito Ichido said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, I have come to help you." As he spoke, he took out the rainbow lotus cup that he had refined for a long time, and he had not used it all this time, and slightly weakened its power. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Although he could still maintain the formation, the demons saw that they could not suppress them and would soon use other methods, so he had to think of a way to break out of this situation. He thought for a while, and there was indeed a breakthrough point that he could use here. When he achieved true yang, there was once a Khanate demon that used an incarnation to fight with him, and he purposely lured it into the Qi Lu, and conveniently erased this memory. Later, when it was unprepared, he caught one of the demon's incarnations, and entered Bu Su Tian to find out the situation. He remembered this demon's qi. Previously, it was hiding in Bu Su Tian, and he could not come into contact with it. Now that he came out, if he could find another strand of it, he might be able to find the true body of this demon. However, this person was hiding, and he could not take the initiative to leave the formation to find it, so he could only lure the enemy in. He understood that this person did not come out because he was afraid of his killing method, but if he took the initiative to expose this secret method, then after these demons saw it and deduced a way to avoid it, it was very likely that they would join forces to kill him. It should be known that his current mystic art was very different from the one he had studied in the beginning. It could be said that it was a completely different Dharma art. He could first use the mystic art that he had learned and pretend to leak it. When the demons came to him, he could then use the mystic art that he had learned. If he had a chance to kill one of them, the remaining three would be much easier to deal with. Thinking of this, he turned to look at Lu Li. This person was an opportunity. These demons deliberately left him here. In fact, it was also a bait, and then he could push the boat with the current boat. Lu Li had been wandering in the formation for dozens of years, and could not be said to be very familiar with the formation, but in a situation where the formation did not actively change, it was not difficult for him to find the way in. Because there was no one presiding over the formation, it was very smooth this time. Soon he passed 3 formations and returned to the 5th formation. Here, he could feel that the enemy was close at hand. Zhang Yan had been paying attention to his movements, and seeing that the opportunity had come, he said, "Friends, I need to be distracted for a moment." Hearing this, Dan Yi knew that he must have a plan and said, "Friend, if you have a plan, you can go ahead first. We can hold on here." Zhang Yan nodded, used the previous method, and calculated Lu Li's position. At the same time, the heavenly coalescing snake hoop also buzzed. After dozens of years, this treasure could be used again. At the same time, he carried an endless amount of Wei and broke into the person's essence. With a flash of golden light, he killed him again. The spirits of the Khanate demons were connected, and when Lu Li was killed, Bai Wei and the others immediately felt it and knew the reason. His expression was slightly shaken, and a strange light shone in his eyes. He said, "So it is this amazing method. It is not much different from my previous deduction. That priest Zhang only needs to find the cultivators back, and he can kill him. Although I do not know the profoundness, if he only needs to avoid the main body, it is not difficult." Chapter 1705. Although Bai Wei and the others had guessed Zhang Yan's method, it was just a guess after all. They couldn't find the exact direction, so they didn't dare to act rashly. Now that they saw it, all their doubts were gone. This kind of secret method always made people shrink back before they knew it, but once it was exposed, it wasn't hard for them to be on guard. Qian Luo, however, was suspicious. "I've never heard of this method before. It's so easily sensed by me. Could it be a formation masking it, leading me to misjudge?" Bai Wei pondered for a moment and said with certainty, "There's no outside interference, so it's undoubtedly the true method. The only thing to worry about is whether this person has other killing divine arts in his hands." Dai Gong didn't believe it and said, "Just this one divine art is already unheard of, let alone others?" Bai Wei shook his head and said, "How can things in the world be fixed? Even if I have the upper hand, aren't I still trembling with fear like I'm walking on thin ice?" Dai Gong thought for a moment and said with pity, "It's a pity that this person isn't willing to join me. If I can grasp this kind of secret method, I can improve my foundation scripture by another level." Qian Luo said indifferently, "It's not impossible. Do the two heavenly venerables still remember that this person achieved it outside of Busu heaven, so he definitely has an inheritance. Maybe it's an inheritance left behind by an almighty ancestor. As long as we find the location of his sect, we might be able to gain something." Dai Gong thought about it and felt that this was a feasible method, but he didn't have much hope. This kind of secret method, no matter who grasped it, would try to cover it up. Maybe it was passed on verbally or divinely, so outsiders wouldn't be able to easily obtain it. Bai Wei waved his sleeve and said, "There's no need to think about all this. Although we've cultivated the human path, didn't we still find another way and combined our strength to perform the fundamental superior grade scripture? Before this, we didn't know that there was such a path, so we didn't take it. Now that we know, we can deduce it ourselves in the future, so why do we need to seek help from others? Moreover, after we become the rulers of the world, we can perform the Tao again. So the human path can be abandoned." When Dai Gong heard this, he nodded and said, "Heavenly Lord Broad Victory is right to remind us that we are too stubborn. When I re-establish my Tao, all of these will be trivial." Bai Wei said, "Celestial Venerable Cheng'an, you cultivate the fundamental stop mantra, so your deduction technique is the most impressive among us. I'll have to trouble you to create an evasion technique for me to use." Dai Gong said, "That's not difficult. Two Celestial Venerables, please wait for me." As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately began to deduce. Because he was using his divine will, it only took an instant for an evasive technique to appear in everyone's mind. Bai Wei took a look and praised, "This method is wonderful." Dai Gong's voice was suffused with killing intent as he said, "Fellow heavenly exalts, I no longer fear this person, so let's make a move." Qian Luo was still suspicious. She said, "We can deduce the evasion technique, but this person can also use it against us. We still need to be careful." Lu Li also replied through the divine will, "Celestial Venerable Miao Yen is right. After you heavenly exalts showed up, that Taoist Zhang hasn't used this technique, but he still dares to expose it now. Then maybe he has a backup plan. Maybe he's luring me forward. Why don't we continue to use the artifact to threaten him? He can't threaten us anyway." Bai Wei wanted to be aggressive, but since the two said so, he agreed. Actually, they had the Tai golden bead. If they used this treasure, it would be easy to break the formation. However, this treasure was precious. Every time it was used, it would be used less. It could only be used at a critical moment to maximize its effectiveness. Also, they could feel that even if they killed Yuan Zun of the human path, there was still a hidden threat in the heavenly design. Therefore, as long as it could be solved by themselves, they didn't want to use this treasure. Apart from that, there was another reason that hindered them, and that was that they had to pay a price to use this treasure. When they used it before, everyone consumed a great deal of vitality. Fortunately, they had the venerable 9 Revolutions Green Lord, so it wasn't too bad. However, they could feel that their bodies seemed to have suffered some damage, but they didn't know if they could recover. If they used it again in a short period of time, it might affect their foundation. Zhang Yan saw that the demon was unmoved at first, as if he had made up his mind not to show himself. However, under his senses, he saw that Lu Li's aura didn't seem to have changed on the surface, but in fact, his method of evasion was different from before. From this, he knew that the skill that he deliberately exposed just now was already known by those demons. It was just that this person was extremely cautious and wouldn't be easily fooled. His eyes flickered slightly. Before planning this, he had already considered this. What if the other party didn't pay attention to him at all? His countermeasure was to display an item in front of the demon. As long as this item moved, it was highly likely that the other party would make a move. However, this alone wasn't enough. He still had to make arrangements for the follow-up. With that thought in mind, he went into Taoist Yi's celestial star formation and said, "I'll have to trouble you to do something for me, fellow Taoist." Michihito Ichido stood up from his position and said, "What do you need me to do?" Zhang Yan transmitted a few words over. Michihito Ichido's eyes lit up, and then he said solemnly, "Don't worry, friend. I will do my best." Zhang Yan nodded and said a few words to Dan Yi and the others. Then, he calmed down and waited for an opportunity. Bai Wei and the others were still increasing the power of their Dao artifacts at a steady pace. They still had the upper hand at the moment, and it was entirely up to them to decide when to attack. Therefore, they weren't anxious at all. If Zhang Yan used the killing method again, then it would be a good opportunity to test it out. After several attempts, Lu Li finally broke through the 5 formations that had trapped him for a long time. At this moment, there was nothing under his feet. He saw a sky full of stars, as if he was in some kind of void. He knew that he had fallen into another formation. He wasn't surprised. The formations in front of him were actually not complicated. If the other party had only set up 5 formations, he would find it strange. However, he believed that it was a number. He believed that with every step he took, he could go a little deeper. In the end, he could force the enemy into a corner. At this moment, he suddenly sensed something. He looked over and saw Zhang Yan standing on a spirit boat that was flashing with spiritual light. However, since the latter took the initiative to conceal his aura, Lu Li could no longer sense him. But as long as he was exposed in front of him, it wouldn't hinder him from making a move. Lu Li chanted casually, and many spells fell on him. Zhang Yan didn't move. His body glowed brightly. Countless rays of sword light shot out from his divine will and slashed at him. Lu Li didn't dare to underestimate him. Even if these rays of sword light couldn't kill him, they could still cut his vitality. He had to be careful. However, after a few breaths, he realized that his spells stopped outside the spirit boat. It wasn't that he couldn't penetrate it, but he felt that there was nothing there. He couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Even if the other party could withstand the power of his curse, it shouldn't be able to do this. However, he could sense that this wasn't an illusion. He then shifted his gaze to the spiritual boat, and his eyes narrowed. Could this thing be? The 4 innate demons had the same divine will. When he realized it, the others also noticed it. At first, they didn't think much of it, but when Lu Li's divine will reached them, their expressions changed. Bai was slightly startled and said, "The heavenly boat made from the unfettered wood?" He frowned and was silent for a moment. Then, he shook his head and said, "We miscalculated." Back then, when the unfettered wood was lost, they had deliberately leaked the news. They wanted to use it to lure Zhang Yan into their trap. They hadn't expected that not only would he see through the mysteries behind it, but he would also be able to refine it despite the lack of Bu Su Heaven's treasures. The four of them suddenly felt that the situation was a little tricky. They originally thought that they could use the Tao artifact to slowly wear down the other party's strength. When they were confident, they would go up and destroy them. However, with this item, it was different. The unfettered boat was not affected by external factors and could avoid all spells. If the other party felt that he couldn't hold on, he could use this item to escape. They might not be able to find him. Even the Tai golden bead couldn't do anything to it because this treasure was only suitable for fighting enemies head-on. It wasn't good at tracking the enemy. Qian Luo sighed faintly and said, "Looks like we have no choice but to move." The other party was clearly telling them that if they couldn't win, they could use this boat to escape. The purpose of this was undoubtedly to lure them into attacking. For the sake of their future plans, they absolutely couldn't let this generation go. So, even if it was poisonous bait, they had to eat it. Dai Gong said, "This is obviously to lure me to show myself. Celestial venerables, be careful." Bai Wei's expression was calm as he said, "We should be careful." He chanted and an incantation was imprinted into the three's divine wills. He said, "The worst-case scenario is that we fall into this person's trap. However, this person's divine ability can only kill one person at most. As long as this person's chi activity appears, there will be an unfettered boat. I can also use a treasure to kill him. I have already left a protective incantation on the celestial venerables. Even if a celestial venerable's dharma body is unfortunately destroyed, his soul will not be destroyed. In the future, when the rest of you control the Bu Su heavenly treasure, you can still bring him back." After the three of them reached an agreement, they didn't hesitate any longer. They immediately escaped from their concealment artifacts and appeared outside. In an instant, they had all landed at the edge of the formation. Zhang Yan had been waiting for this moment. He raised his head and looked over, his gaze suddenly sharpening. However, his target was no longer Lu Li, but Dai Gong's location. At this moment, without any hesitation, he immediately came up with the idea to divine. Because of that, he already knew the person's vital signs. Therefore, as soon as he used his secret method, he immediately found the person's true identity. Dai Gong also sensed it immediately. He couldn't help but feel his heart palpitate. He realized that the other party's divine ability had directly bypassed the process of searching for chi activity and directly landed on his true body. He immediately felt that something was wrong. He realized that the previous evasive method was not enough to deal with it. He didn't just sit and wait for death. Instead, he relied on that instant of feeling and quickly consumed his chi. He repeatedly calculated in his divine will, trying to deduce this method to a higher level. Even if he couldn't resist it, Bai Wei and the others could use it. However, before he could do all this, he felt an irresistible Wei crash into his chi. Before he could respond, there was suddenly a burst of golden light in front of him. Then the void collapsed and everything was crushed. After Zhang Yan killed Dai Gong with a single strike, the LV Yuan golden bell in the sky lost its master. It let out a sigh of relief and the pressure on its body lightened. However, at the same time, a great sense of danger arose in his heart. A white light shone in front of him, accompanied by a sound of a sword that pierced through his mind. It had already slashed into his Dharmakaya. Chapter 1706. Even though Zhang Yan felt that his dharma had been struck by an external object, he still maintained his composure. This was because he had already predicted that after he killed one, a flaw would appear whether he was willing or not. At that time, the fiendish demon would definitely use his most powerful attack in an attempt to kill him. Just now, he saw that it was a ray of white sword energy. It should be the pure yin-yang seal that could kill a true yang cultivator. Fortunately, he was prepared. Long before he came out, he had already used the glazed lotus cup to protect himself. At the same time, he had also rolled the Xian Yuan imperial seal into his sleeve. Even though these two treasures were not as proficient as the other parties, they were on the same level. Thus, they could still slightly resist. Thus, he took advantage of this moment to do something else. This time, he used the 9 formations visualized in his divine will to descend into the real world, instantly enveloping Bai Wei and himself. Then, the two of them disappeared from where they were. Just now, when Dai Gong was killed, Qian Luo was also shocked. She didn't know that Dai Gong had already exposed himself, but she couldn't help but think that if Zhang Yan was coming for her just now, it would be difficult for him to escape death. Even though she was terrified in her heart, her movements weren't slow at all. She relied on the technique Dai Gong had passed down to her before she gestured with her fair hand and put the treasure away. In fact, the treasures in the hands of the four of them all corresponded with each other. Even if one of them lost it, any one of them could summon it back. If it wasn't for Zhang Yan snatching the treasures when he killed Lu Li and they were alone, they might not have succeeded. At this moment, with the two Dao artifacts in her hands, she calmed her heart and tried to sense them again. To her surprise, she discovered that she could no longer sense Zhang Yan and Bai Wei's whereabouts. In fact, she couldn't even connect with Bai Wei in her divine will. It was as if they had been moved to another realm. However, she didn't believe that she couldn't find them. She immediately tried to divine. In the depths of the inner realm, Dan Yi saw a turning point and immediately said, "Fellow Fu, fellow Zhang's plan has succeeded. It's time for us to act." Fu Qingming responded. He didn't waste any time and immediately moved his avatar. The next moment, the two of them appeared outside the formation at the same time. They appeared on Qian Luo's left and right, creating a 2-on-1 situation. In the formation, Michihito Ichito immediately operated the formation according to Zhang Yan's instructions. No matter what Lu Li did, he trapped Lu Li in the star formation. At the same time, he looked at the battle in the sky with the soul-setting Rui in his hand. He was prepared to use the soul-setting Rui if the two of them couldn't win. The four innate demons were originally working together, but now that one of them had been killed, the remaining three were fighting on their own. Their original advantage was gone, and the situation suddenly became favorable to the human Dao side. Once Fu Qingming arrived outside, he took the opportunity before Qian Luo could activate the Lu Yuan Golden Bell again to make his move first. His lineage of Dao impartation was born with a vast and abundant vital qi. Even though he had become a Dao god now, there wasn't much of a change. The moment he activated his divine will, balls of vast and mighty green qi appeared like clouds and enveloped Qian Luo. Qian Luo's eyes were cold. Just now, she couldn't see her opponent. Even with the Dao treasure, it was difficult for her to display its true power. However, it was different now. She raised her wrist and caused the Qian Kun inverted gourd to shake. In an instant, everything turned upside down and mixed up. All the nearby auras suddenly became infinitely far away. Fu Qingming only felt as if his body was being pulled by an invisible force. He secretly exclaimed how powerful it was. If he tried to resist at this moment, then under the influence of this treasure, he would only fall into chaos. Even this thought of his might make a mistake and cause a completely opposite or deviate result. If his previous self was here, in front of this Dao treasure, he might be overwhelmed in a single move and fall into a bitter struggle until his origin energy was exhausted and he was killed. Therefore, he didn't choose to resist. Instead, he followed the force and tore himself apart. He even added another force. In an instant, a vast tide of origin energy exploded. Qian Luo frowned, and then she shook the bottle gourd once more, causing the surrounding true qi to immediately respond and return to its original calm state, and it seemed as if it had never erupted. But at this moment her beautiful face changed slightly as she swept her gaze around, and she noticed that she was already standing on an enormous golden lotus, and there seemed to be boundless space in her surroundings. She knew that she'd been trapped by some sort of treasure. She looked around. Although she could use the magic treasure here, she couldn't sense the opponent's location. It seemed to be useless. However, a cold smile appeared on her beautiful face. If she couldn't find the person, then she could deal with the external object that enveloped her. So, she stretched out her slender finger and tapped on the gourd. The entire world instantly shook. In the void, Fu Qingming came back again. He had the body of a Dao god. Even the power that could heavily injure ordinary true yang experts just now couldn't do anything to him. He looked at the golden lotus that was constantly trembling and bending in Dan Yi's hand and said, "How long can it trap this person?" Dan Yi's expression was solemn. He felt that the golden lotus bud was gradually falling. It seemed to be slightly unable to bear the burden, so he said, "It's hard to know. Maybe a few breaths or maybe a few days. If it doesn't work, we can't fight her head-on. We can only hide in the formation again according to the previous method." Although they had trapped this woman, not to mention the Qian Kun inverted gourd, she also had LV Yuan's golden bell in her hand. Her strength could be said to have decreased instead of increasing. If she charged out, they would definitely not be able to defeat her head-on. The key here still rested on Zhang Yan. As long as the latter could deal with that, or end the battle ahead of time and come out to help them, then everything was possible. At this moment, Zhang Yan was already standing in the grand formation of the 9 realms. Bai Wei was temporarily trapped somewhere and couldn't come out for the time being. He raised his eyes and looked inside. He saw a sword light that was like a white rainbow moving back and forth in the shadows of his past and future. This thing was the pure yin-yang seal. It was said to respond to the movement of vitality and could separate and refine people in the past and future. Every time a cultivator's past was killed, they would lose a part of their foundation. Every time a cultivator's future was cut off, they would eliminate a possibility. The final goal was to erase all traces of their existence in the present world. At that time, they would disappear without a trace. He felt his qi being continuously weakened, and he was falling at an extremely fast speed. He took a look at the glazed lotus and found that there was no foul qi in the treasure. He couldn't help but feel slightly surprised. For this to happen, either the lotus couldn't bear this power, or the pure yin-yang seal didn't really have any effect on him. Originally, he was going to use the 2 magic treasures on him to withstand it. If he could resist it for a while, then he would use the secret method and see if he could kill this person. If he couldn't, then he would hide in the Red Continent. However, he didn't plan to use the second method unless he had no other choice. Once he reached there would be no one to control the grand formation of the 9 realms. The other person would be able to charge out quickly, and the originally good situation would change again. However, the current situation was completely unexpected. However, there had to be a reason for this. After thinking about it for a moment, he looked again, and this time, he discovered some clues. That sword seal was chasing after the whole thing, because in his shadow of the past, only when his Dharma body and body became one could he be considered a complete person. In other words, this treasure had to cut off all traces of the past of these 2 people at the same time in order to truly succeed. Right now, his strength was only at the 6th cycle. If his body was in any part of the void origin sea, he would be cut by the magic treasure without any chance of escaping. However, this was where the change occurred. Right now, his body was in the Red Continent, in the reverse of heaven and earth. This was not a place the treasure could reach. This created a contradictory outcome. At this moment, even though he was being continuously weakened, it was because the treasure was suppressing him, but it couldn't completely erase him from the world. So, once the treasure left, he would be able to quickly recover. This was like climbing a mountain. As long as you hadn't reached the peak, no matter how close you were, even if you were only 1 step away, as long as you hadn't truly taken that step, you wouldn't have reached the final destination. He himself had not expected such an outcome, but this did not mean that he could rest easy. His qi activity continued to weaken, and his combat ability had already been suppressed to the extreme. If he were to clash with Bai Wei now, then that person could easily suppress him, and it would be exceptionally dangerous. Thus, after thinking about it again, he decided not to move for now. Bai Wei was currently in a certain region of the Grand Formation. He could feel the omnipresent pressure, but it couldn't do anything to a true young cultivator like him. At most, he couldn't find a way out. Moreover, he had already activated the yin-yang pure seal. Even if he didn't know where Zhang Yan was, he could control the treasure from afar. Even if the latter hid on the unfettered tree, he still wouldn't be able to escape. However, what surprised him was that the treasure still hadn't returned. Clearly, it couldn't keep killing the enemy. He began to ponder and thought to himself, maybe this is because this person's foundation is especially deep. If the yin-yang pure seal met someone with a shallow foundation, even if that person was a true young cultivator, then one slash could completely erase that person from the world. However, if that person's foundation was deep, or if he had a magic treasure to protect himself, then he might not be able to kill him in one strike. However, if he used a few more strikes, he could still achieve his goal. However, at this moment, he didn't know where Zhang Yan was. If he took it back, he might not be able to find him again. However, after controlling this treasure for so many years, this wasn't all he needed. The reason why this Tao artifact was called the Yin-Yang Pure Seal was that the past was Yin and the future was Yang. However, there was actually another meaning to it. The righteous path strength was called Yang, and the soft and strange changes were called Yin. Just now, he was only using the Yang technique. He still hadn't used the Yin technique. This technique would cause a cultivator to fall into all sorts of dangerous situations in the past and future. However, no matter how hard they tried, they would still be defeated in the end. Thus, when their minds were led, they would deny themselves and use the cultivator's power to kill themselves. Thinking of this, he focused his mind. In an instant, his origin chi decreased slightly, and this change appeared. Chapter 1707. Zhang Yan was originally in the formation, but he suddenly felt his spirit sinking as if he was about to enter a muddle-headed state. However, his mind was firm, and he immediately woke up. He was surprised to find that his surroundings were different from just now. He was in a carriage. He was wearing a fox fur coat and was leaning on a soft cushion. He was holding a warm stove in his hand, and the sound of carriages and horses could be heard. He sensed for a moment and realized that his mighty force seemed to have been concealed, and he could not move it at all. At this moment, a familiar voice came from outside. Lang Jun will reach the Azure Parasol Mountain in a few dozen miles. Everyone says that there are immortals living on this mountain. Is it true? He thought about it and lifted the curtain to take a look. He suddenly felt a gust of cold air seeping in, dispersing much of the warmth in the carriage. Outside the carriage, the sky was clear and bright. The road was muddy, and there was snow melting on both sides. Fortunately, the stone road was flat, so it did not feel bumpy. The person driving the carriage was his loyal servant, Zhang Shi. After thinking about it, he realized that this was the year when his predecessor and his servant first entered Qinsong school to be apprenticed. He thought about it and immediately knew that this was most likely the effect of the pure yin and yang. He was immersed in his past memories, but what was the point of doing this? There was indeed such a divine ability to make one immerse themselves in the past and shake one's mind. However, those that were able to cultivate to his level were mostly people with firm dispositions and had overcome numerous tribulations, so how could mere matters of the past be able to shake them? He thought about it again and thought of a possibility. Zhang Shi heard that there was no reply for a long time, so he turned around and asked with concern, "Lang Jun?" Zhang Yan smiled at him and said, "Of course there are immortals." As he said this, he let down the curtain. Zhang Shi murmured, "It's good that there are, it's good that there are." Zhang Yan sat back down. Everything in front of him, including the conversation, was the same as what his predecessor had experienced. However, he knew that things would not be so simple, so he wanted to see what the other party was up to. The carriage did not go far before arriving at the foot of the mountain. There was a pavilion there, and there were attendants from the lower house who stopped the road to ask questions. However, these people only knew basic qi cultivation and were not cultivators. Zhang Shilai had already inquired about this place. As long as one handed over a nameplate and some money, one could enter. Hence, he got off the carriage to talk to the guard. But after a while, he came back with a worried look and reported, "Lang Jun, the guards won't let us go up the mountain." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. In the impression of his predecessor, this place had been smoothly passed without any twists and turns. This was undoubtedly the doing of that magical treasure. He smiled and said a few words to Zhang Shi, ordering him to smooth things over. After a long time, the latter came back and said that the person guarding the pavilion still refused to bend the rules. Zhang Yan nodded to show that he understood. He got out of the carriage and sent Zhang Shi to find a nearby inn to stay. He picked up a defensive sword and a bamboo chip. After identifying the direction, he went to another mountain. He had been in the lower house for 3 years, so he knew that there was more than one way up the mountain. There were at least a dozen paths that were not known to outsiders. Since this path was blocked, he could go up from other places. It was not a problem for him. Of course, since he knew that this was an illusion, it was not his original purpose to go up the mountain. He just wanted to see how the treasure would react. It only took him 2 more days to reach the top of the mountain through a small mountain path. There were many twists and turns along the way. Tigers, leopards, bears, and insects all came out. He knew every pavilion that was built by cultivators. As long as he went in to rest, he would be fine. However, it did not work this time. However, he was not the youth who went up the mountain that year. With a bamboo chip in his hand, he could use the spiritual vigor of the mountain to set up an illusion and keep the mountain beasts away. Although there were always some accidents, such as the bamboo chip being swept away by the wind, or the sword slipping out of his hand, he still avoided them without any danger. However, the moment he reached the top of the mountain, the scenery in front of him changed. He appeared in the cave where he had practiced for 3 years. At this time, he was short of clothes and food. His chi meridians could not break through. The cave where he lived was about to be taken back by the lower house. He was about to fall into a desperate situation. He thought for a while and turned around to go down the mountain. This time, there was no external force to stop him. In fact, it was very smooth. He guessed that this treasure would put him in a difficult situation. However, if it could restrain him, it would be a joke. Although he was trapped in his own memory, he was still a true young almighty who could destroy the world with a single thought. Even if he could not use mana here, he still had countless secret skills and powers. If he really wanted to go through it again, why would he need to join a sect? Moreover, when he achieved the cave, he had created a Taoist legacy. Even if he did not have any external objects, he could open his meridians and break through. After that, he could fly in the sky and burrow into the ground. He could find other things to cultivate and continue his cultivation. With this thought, he seemed to have touched something. The scenery in front of him changed again. This time, he found himself in a dark and gloomy place. This was the Devil's Cave of the Sea's Eye. Outside, there were demonic shadows. It was as if he was surrounded by countless demons. He smiled and conjured an evasive spell. He walked out of the encirclement calmly. As he did so, the scenery shattered again. Since then, he had passed through more than a dozen scenes. Every time, he was in danger or in a difficult situation, but he easily dealt with them with his extraordinary experience and knowledge. At this point, he could almost understand the purpose of the treasure. Every time he gained a slight advantage and was about to defeat his opponent, the yin-yang sword mark would sense it and immediately move him to another memory mark. Once he suffered a setback, it would continue and then suppress him even more fiercely. This seemed to want the cultivator to deny himself. However, there seemed to be some problems with the circulation of chi here because the best way to do this was to conceal his own consciousness, but this treasure could not do so. In truth, when the yin-yang sword mark was used, the cultivator who was trapped would not be aware of any memories of the past or the future. The only thing they could use was the method they used at the time. This was equivalent to getting rid of everything in your life that was beneficial to you. Naturally, all that was left was the dark side of failure. True yang cultivators still had their own Weili, so they had the ability to do whatever they wanted. Every time they fell into a desperate situation and thought they could not fight back, they would weaken themselves imperceptibly. However, the problem here was still the same as just now. Zhang Yan's physical body was still within the Scarlet Continent, so the treasure could not completely envelop him. There was a loophole. It was like the dreamer knowing that he was in a dream. Zhang Yan now understood that because his memories were complete, his mind was not affected at all. Even if he did not do anything, it would not be a big problem. However, he did not want to do this. Using the treasure required origin chi. As long as he successfully passed through the dangerous situation or turned the situation around, then every time he went over, he would be able to consume some of his origin chi. If the other party did not retreat, then he could very well keep them company. On the other side of the formation, Bai Wei had been using the yin-yang sword mark, but an instant later he found that his origin chi had suddenly dropped. In an instant he had used up 80 to 90% of his origin chi. His expression could not help but change slightly. He reacted in time and hurriedly stopped the technique. Because the Yin sword mark had fallen into the cultivator's past memories, neither the master nor the treasure itself could tell what exactly had happened inside. Even though the treasure had gone through countless years of development, it had only been an instant outside, which was why such a situation had occurred. However, if he could achieve what he wanted, then this bit of effort was worth it. However, when he checked, he found that Zhang Yan was still safe and sound. He could not help but frown and think to himself, I never thought this person would be so difficult to deal with. Fortunately, it's not like I don't have any tricks up my sleeves. In the past, it wasn't as if there weren't people with a firm heart who wouldn't be moved by external factors at all. This was especially so for those who walked the path of emotionlessness. Therefore, if he still couldn't subdue his opponent like this, then there was still one last change. The yin-yang sword mark was clearly a sword, but the reason it was called a sword mark was because it could seal a cultivator within it and prevent them from escaping. Therefore, even if he could not kill this opponent this time, as long as he found an opportunity, he could make him unable to stand in the present world. However, to do this, the amount of origin chi needed was undoubtedly more. Just now, the deficit in the formation had greatly injured his origin chi. He was temporarily unable to do anything, so he could only stop and use the 9-turn green goblet to recover his origin chi. He was prepared to take down the opponent in one move after he recovered. At this moment, Zhang Yan also broke free from the past because he stopped. He discovered that the treasure was still entrenched in his body, but its aura was not as imposing as before. Obviously, he had achieved his goal, but there was still a sense of danger lingering around him. He guessed that the other party still had some powerful tricks up his sleeves. He thought for a moment and secretly prepared himself. Outside, Danny had restrained Qian Luo for more than 10 breaths. He saw the golden light on the heaven-born golden lotus was flickering and the flower bud was trembling. His expression darkened. He knew that the opponent was about to break free. Fortunately, he and Fu Qingming had already retreated into a formation that had been set up beforehand. Even if the woman rushed out, he could temporarily trap her here and continue to delay her. In another formation, because Bai Wei was also using the 9-turn green goblet, Lu Li's origin chi was inevitably weakened. Lu Li was shocked. He knew that she must have run into some trouble. He had wanted to cover it up, but on second thought, he thought it would only make things worse. So he just let it be. Michihito Ichido was in the same formation as Lu Li. Naturally, he sensed it as well. Previously, when the origin chi of the demon was almost endless, Michihito Ichido had guessed that Bai Wei might have obtained some nourishment from somewhere else. But now that the situation was like this, there might be something wrong there. However, he could not rule out the possibility that Bai Wei was deliberately luring him to make a move. He thought about it for a moment and decided not to make a move. Even if the other party did something wrong, he did not have the means to kill him instantly. He would not be able to determine the outcome of the battle in a short period of time. What he needed to do now was to trap him. As long as he succeeded with Zhang Yan, everything would be resolved when he returned. That being said, this did not prevent him from putting more pressure on the opponent. Lu Li visualized in his mind. Countless rainbows appeared out of thin air and surrounded Lu Li. Chapter 1708. In the formation, Zhang Yan gradually felt the sense of danger in his heart grow heavier and heavier. Usually, this kind of omen meant that the other side was about to use a killing move. Once it came, it would be difficult to defend against it. Bai Wei never moved from his position in the formation. It was obvious that he hadn't found a way out. The greatest threat was the yin-yang pure seal. This treasure was still in the avatar and was suppressing him. He couldn't use enough Fa Li to use the killing secret technique. Otherwise, he could use this opportunity to fight this person. He couldn't help but think about how to get out of this situation. The most convenient way was to escape into the Red Continent. That way, he would be temporarily disconnected from the primal void sea. This way, he could immediately escape from the treasure. However, there was no one to control the formation of the 9 boundaries. If Bai Wei escaped, Dan Yi and the others wouldn't be able to stop him. The situation would immediately collapse. Therefore, when he left, there would be someone to control the formation for him, or there would be another plan. This formation could only be controlled by someone who was proficient in changes. Originally, he could use an avatar, but the Yin-Yang Pure Seal was used to deal with true Yang cultivators. No matter how many avatars he had, no matter where he was, as long as he was in the primal void sea, he would be affected and lose control. He thought about it. He could first find a way to escape into Patriarchy Haitian's forbidden area and try to use the seal there to resist the treasure. Even he had to rely on a turtle to enter and exit there. That place could seal true Yang demons, and it was also where the glazed lotus cup was, so he might be able to avoid the treasure's power. So with a thought, he instantly appeared in a wide stone room. At this moment, he was in front of the altar where the lotus cup was originally placed. As he expected, as soon as he arrived, an invisible Wei-Li enveloped him. The Yin-Yang Pure Seal's suppression on his Fa Li and Qi was suddenly released. He quickly recovered, but at the same time, he could feel that the treasure hadn't left the avatar. In other words, as long as he went outside, he would no longer have the power of the seal. He would still be restricted, and he wouldn't be able to solve this problem. In this case, the only way to be free was to enter the Red Continent. However, after he left, he needed to maintain the formation of the 9 realms. There was indeed another way. He waved his sleeve, and in the next moment he appeared in the formation that Michito Ichito was in charge of. As expected, as soon as he returned to the outside, without the Wei-Li restraining him, the treasure reappeared, and his aura was suppressed just like before. When Michihito Ichito saw him, he asked happily, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, how is that demon?" Zhang Yan said, "He's still trapped in the array, but I'm temporarily limited by his Dao tool, so it's hard for me to get rid of him. Now I need to use a method, but I can't personally control the array that's trapping this person, so I need to use the Spirit World Rui." Michito Ichito handed over the Spirit World Rui without hesitation. "Fellow Taoist, just take it." Zhang Yan held the Rui, and at the same time, the imperial seal of Xian Yuan and the divine Dang Tianjing floated out. He said, "I will take this treasure, and the few of you will seem weak here. I will leave these 2 treasures here to help you." Michito Ichito knew that this wasn't the time to be polite, so he took the 2 treasures and said with a solemn expression, "Then you must be careful." Zhang Yan nodded, and he returned to the formation. He picked up the Spirit World Rui and felt the flow of aura in it. When he held this treasure before, he noticed that as long as the wish didn't cause the aura in the room to become restless, then the wish would be fulfilled. There were many reasons involved here, and he couldn't explain it clearly because he hadn't been in contact with this treasure for long, so he could only calm his heart. He focused his gaze on it, and then he made a wish, asking this item to control the formation for him. This wish wasn't excessive, and it was a spontaneous thought. A moment later, he felt a part of his origin chi being taken away, and he knew the matter was done. However, he found that his origin chi was originally suppressed by the pure Yin-Yang seal, but this Spirit World Rui could bypass this treasure and directly take it away. It could be seen that it was originally Wei-Li, and at least not much weaker than the pure Yin-Yang seal. As expected of a treasure that could be made to hold wishes. At this moment, there was a flash of light, and the Spirit World Rui left his hand and fell into the formation. If there were no accidents, it would fall into the hands of the demon again. However, the battle would be even more intense, and this person might not have the chance to use it or find the chance to use it. At this moment, Bai Wei's aura was gradually rising. It was obvious that when he recovered, it would be the time to make a move. He didn't delay any longer, and with a thought, he appeared in the vast Scarlet Continent. At this moment, he felt his body lighten. He could feel that the pure Yin-Yang seal had disappeared from his body. It was obvious that the treasure couldn't enter this space, and it had been isolated outside. However, the threat wasn't truly resolved. The next time his opponent saw him, he could use the Spirit World Rui to attack him again, unless he escaped into the Scarlet Continent every time. However, if that continued, he would be able to keep himself intact, but he wouldn't be able to defeat his opponent. The safest way was to deal with this matter once and for all. That way, there wouldn't be any future troubles. At this moment, even though there were no external objects holding him back, within the Scarlet Continent, the aura seemed to be frozen. It wouldn't recover, but it wouldn't weaken either. As a result, he calmed his mind and returned to the formation, silently waiting for his magic power and origin chi to recover. On the other side of the formation, Bai Wei's magic power gradually recovered. He was about to immediately seal Zhang Yan, but at this moment he suddenly fell into a daze. Then he saw that the pure yin-yang seal had returned to his divine will, as if it had never been used. What's going on? As the master of this treasure, he was able to detect some traces of his opponent after he took it back. But at this moment, when he sent his consciousness into it, he couldn't help but be shocked because he noticed that it was completely empty and there wasn't a single trace left behind. Even he was slightly horrified. He didn't understand what had happened. If it wasn't for the fact that he had refined this treasure for millions of years, and the aura buried within it was deeply rooted, he might have left it outside. He frowned and fell into deep thought. Just now, due to the obstruction of the formation, he could only use this treasure to sense all of Zhang Yan's changes. Now, he couldn't sense Zhang Yan's movements. However, he was certain that Zhang Yan was still in this world. Since his opponent hadn't died, he had to consider his own safety. In this formation, it was the master of the formation. Without the restriction of the treasure, it meant that he could be found by his opponent at any time, and he couldn't take the initiative to attack. In that case, retreating might be a solution. However, he hadn't been here for long. It hadn't even been 15 minutes. Such a short amount of time was enough for him to find a way out. If he didn't care about anything else, it wouldn't be difficult. However, he couldn't care about that now. Because he knew that when Zhang Yan recovered his magic power, he would definitely come to find him and use the technique that killed Dai Gong to deal with him. Fortunately, it wasn't like he didn't have a chance. From what happened just now, it could be seen that Dai Gong couldn't block the yin-yang pure seal. He just didn't know what method he used to avoid it. As long as Dai Gong appeared, he could seize the opportunity and slash the treasure into Dai Gong's avatar again. The prerequisite was that he could avoid the technique. However, he had perfected Dai Gong's spell, but it wasn't safe. He needed to add another layer of protection. With this thought, he made a gesture and a pure-colored Taoist robe appeared on his body. This was the treasure that Bu Su personally refined before the great change in heaven. Unfortunately, the materials used in the first refinement were inferior, so it could never become a Taoist tool. After obtaining the yin-yang pure seal, he rarely used it. Now, in order to guard against the killing technique, he had to take it out again. Even if it could only obstruct Dai Gong a little, it was still useful. After Zhang Yan returned to the formation, without any external interference, his chi was recovering quickly. Although it wasn't perfect, he could attack earlier. However, he knew that the opponent in front of him had the highest cultivation among the 4 Khanate demons. At the same time, he was also the first Khanate demon to be a disciple of the human Tao. He wouldn't be easy to deal with. Moreover, this person had seen his secret technique, so he must have deduced a new way to avoid it. If he wanted to kill this person, he would probably have to go through a lot of trouble. Moreover, he also knew that until now, 6 of the 7 Taoist tools that were originally left by the human Tao Yuanzun had shown up. There was still one that hadn't shown up, and he didn't know if it was in the hands of this person. Although it wasn't used for battle, he still had to be careful. Not long after, his Yuan Qi and mana recovered completely again. Thus, he didn't hesitate anymore and started to deduce the location of the real body. Bai Wei's eyes moved. At this moment, he also felt something and immediately used the evasion technique. Zhang Yan felt that his qi was wandering, but his technique couldn't land on his body. After thinking for a while, he knew what the flaw was. He immediately deduced again and made up for the flaw. Then he calculated again. After Bai Wei dodged a few times, he found that the flaws of the opponent's secret technique were getting fewer and fewer, and it was getting harder to deal with it. If he continued like this, It was equivalent to helping the opponent perfect this technique. He felt that this couldn't go on, because he couldn't leave this formation for the time being. Although he could still deal with it now, the opponent's secret technique seemed to be getting stronger and stronger. As long as he miscalculated once, he might end up the same as Dai Gong. Thus, he raised his divine will and said to the other two Khanate demons, "Today's situation is actually in a predicament. It's really hard to predict. Looks like we can only ask the Tai sect to break out of this situation." Qian Luo said faintly, "This move is extremely damaging to the foundation. Heavenly Lord Guangxing should think carefully." However, Lu Li agreed and said, "I think that Heavenly Lord Guangxing's words are feasible. As long as we can win this round, everything can be done slowly. If we lose now, then we have no hope of becoming the ruler of the world. That would be losing everything." Qian Luo didn't say anything else, obviously agreeing. Seeing this, Bai Wei didn't hesitate at all. He resolutely cupped his hands towards the sky and said, "Fellow Taoist Tai, please make your move." Chapter 1709. As soon as Bai Wei said this, a spot of spiritual light bloomed in the sky. Ripples appeared in the void like water, but at the same time, there was a sense of permanence. This light was both slow and swift, still and moving. It could be said to be extremely contradictory. As it gradually spread out, everyone felt as if the very foundation of all things in the world had been shaken at this moment. The moment the spiritual light appeared, Zhang Yan felt a pressure he had never felt before. He immediately realized that the demons had used the primordial cardinal treasure when they saw the situation wasn't right. He knew he couldn't stay in the formation, so he dodged and went outside. At this moment he felt a great shock. He looked over and saw that at this moment, whether it was the formation of the 9 realms that he had set up or the formations that Dan Yi and the others had put in so much effort, they were all shattered. Everything returned to its original state. At the same time, he could feel that the spiritual aura of the demons had dropped a lot. Obviously, there was a price to pay for using such a treasure. His eyes flashed. If he used the secret method now, he might be able to kill one of them. However, when he looked over, he saw that the spiritual light in the sky hadn't faded. There was something in it that was hard to identify. He knew that it was the Tai golden bead. If he went forward and attacked, the bead might not be able to stop him. It was very likely that it would use the bead again. Then it would only be a death sentence. He thought for a while and felt that with the appearance of the treasure, there was no chance of winning. So, he waved his sleeve and the victorious heavenly ship turned into a rainbow light and flew away. He said with his divine will, "My 3 friends, please leave first." Fu Qingming was startled. "My friend Zhang, this..." As a Tao god, he had already decided that if anything happened he would stay behind to cover the retreat. He didn't think that Zhang Yan would take the initiative to do this. Zhang Yan said, "I have my own way to escape. My friends, don't worry." Dan Yi knew that the opportunity to retreat was fleeting, and this wasn't the time to be entangled in such matters. Otherwise, none of them would be able to leave. Furthermore, he had complete trust in Zhang Yan, and thus didn't delay at all. He said, "Let's go." He then beckoned for the 3 of them to enter the heavenly vessel. After which, they disappeared in a flash of rainbow light. The 3 Khanate fiendish demons did not stop them. Instead, they stood there quietly and watched them leave. When Zhang Yan saw that he didn't make a move, it didn't seem like he was powerless. Instead, it seemed like he had a plan. His eyes flashed and he didn't stay any longer. In the next moment, his figure also disappeared without a trace. At this time, Bai Wei said, "What do you think, Miao Xing Tianzuan?" Qian Luo said confidently, "Don't worry, Heavenly Lord Guangxing. These 4 people, Yuan Zun, have already been trapped by my Dharma treasure. Even with the heavenly vessel made from the unfettered wood and we can't find them, they can forget about going anywhere else." Without the concealment of the formation, the might of the Tao artifact in her hands immediately appeared. However, she did not use it to attack the enemy. Instead, she immediately used it to create an endless world domain and soundlessly enveloped the 4 of them. In this place, heaven and earth were overturned, neither far nor near. Although because of the unfettered wooden boat, she was unable to rely on it to find the location of the four of them. However, they were trapped in this region of space, and were unable to easily escape. Unable to go to any other realm, they could slowly find a way to deal with them. Bai Wei said, "We have to end this matter as soon as possible. The other three people, Yuan Zun is fine, but that Taoist Zhang is unpredictable. If he's still in this world, he'll be a huge threat to us." Qian Luo deeply agreed. Just now, after the formation was broken, she felt that Zhang Yan's gaze fell on her for a moment, as if he wanted to use a secret method to kill her. At that time, she was also very frightened. And the Tai golden bead only had one last chance left. It was just that they had consecutively used it twice in dozens of years, and the consumption was indeed not small. The loss of vitality was just a small matter, but it was basically almost shaken. Unless it was necessary, they wouldn't easily take it out again. But in reality, there was no need to use this item. These people no longer had the protection of the formation. It wouldn't be difficult for them to win this battle just by relying on the Dao tool in their hands. Just like Lu Lin and the other three, even if they bitterly held on for a long time, didn't they still die in their hands in the end? At this moment, Lu Li suddenly felt something. He reached into the void and took the spiritual world Rui. He couldn't help but smile. As far as he was concerned, after those formations were broken, there was no longer any suspense about the outcome. Coming down here was just to chase after the remaining enemies. He said loudly, "To Heaven Venerables, as long as we kill these last few people, we will be the masters of this world." On the victorious heavenly ship, as soon as Zhang Yan appeared, Dan Yi and the others noticed it. They came over and asked with concern, "Taoist Zhang, are you hurt?" Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "The demons didn't stop us." He paused for a moment, then looked up and said, "I think that if they don't have any ulterior motives, then they're not afraid that we'll escape." Michito Ichito thought for a moment, then used the coiled throat to calculate. After a long time, his expression froze and he said, "That's not right. We seem to be circling in a certain space. We've really been hit by the demons." Danny thought for a moment, then frowned and said, "In that case, in the hands of the demons, the only thing that can do this is the heaven and earth upside-down gourd. We might be trapped by this treasure and can't go to other worlds." Fu Qingming and Michito Ichito's expressions also turned solemn. They tried using their magic power, only to find that everything was upside down and chaotic. Not only could they not arrange the formation, even visualizing external objects was extremely difficult. Their hearts couldn't help but sink. Although the unfettered could avoid external causes and they weren't afraid of the demons finding them for a short period of time, as long as they couldn't get out of this place, it was hard to say what the future would be like. Fu Qingming said in a low voice, "If we can't find a way, then we'll just have to wait for the demons to find us and then fight them." Michito Ichito, however, didn't think that they could win. He sighed and said, "With that innate cardinal treasure in hand, it's really hard to win. This battle we've probably lost." In reality, without the Tai golden bead, the demons still had the Dao treasure in hand. Without the formation's protection, like Lu Lin and the others, they couldn't win in a head-on battle no matter what. Dan Yi's expression was gloomy. At this point they had already used up all their tricks. At this moment he thought of the scene of the people Dao suffering through the divine will and couldn't help but let out a deep sigh. Zhang Yan walked to the side and stood there with his sleeves behind his back, looking at the dark void outside. After a while, he said, "Maybe there's still a chance." Dan Yi suddenly raised his head and said with slight agitation, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, do you still have any tricks up your sleeves?" Zhang Yan turned around and said solemnly, "It's not any tricks. If I do something, it might be able to deal with the demons, but it might also bring about more troubles in the future. I'm afraid that everyone here will have to bear the consequences, and none of you will be able to escape." The three of them couldn't help but be surprised. Dan Yi thought for a while and said, "Forgive me for being presumptuous, but can fellow Taoist reveal a thing or two?" Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "Right now, I still have some confidence. But if I reveal it now, the heavenly secret will be revealed. What will happen in the future is not something I can predict. Fu Qingming said resolutely, as long as we can defeat the demons, I'm willing to bear any future troubles with fellow Taoist. Michihito Ichido smiled and said, no matter how bad the situation is, can it be worse than what's in front of us? Danny lowered his head and pondered. Then, he raised his head and said with a resolute expression, fellow Taoist, you can do whatever you want to do. As long as you don't destroy humanity, we can also do our best to remedy any future troubles. Zhang Yan nodded and bowed solemnly. Then, his body disappeared from the victorious heavenly ship. When he reappeared, he was already inside the Scarlet Continent. His physical body here also opened its eyes and said with a deep gaze, in the end, I still have to take this step. Previously, when he came here in search of the divine contract 7 secret art, he already knew that there were countless extraterrestrial demons in the reverse dimension of heaven and earth. As the saying went, demons were impermanent. These demons could be destroyed in an instant, and there were thousands of them in an instant, covering the past and the future. However, under such circumstances, numerous formidable consciousnesses that didn't perish had condensed here, and they were rising and falling at every single moment. They were like piles of sand on the desert. Even though they seemed to be ordinary on the surface, there were countless grains of sand that were ceaselessly gathering and changing within them. After experiencing countless births and deaths, these consciousnesses became purer and purer. They gradually sensed the location of the void primordial sea and realized that the Scarlet Continent was only a restraint to them. Only by breaking through the barrier of this world and connecting the two worlds could they break through the shackle. However, just like how they didn't exist in the modern world was frozen to them as well. They couldn't directly affect each other. However, some kind of whaley seemed to have caused the demonic treasury to appear and land in the void primordial sea. Its goal was to find a person and open this barrier for them. Zhang Yan had defeated all the people who had learned the divine contract 7 secret art in the past and the future. In the modern world, he was the only one who had reached the 6th transformation of this technique, and he was the only one who could do this. Once he blasted open the barrier between the two worlds, he would obtain great benefits. Countless indescribable things could even directly push him into the 7th stage of strength path. Moreover, not mentioning the Dharma body of Chi path, this Dharma body of strength path would become the first demon master after the two worlds fused together. If the extraterrestrial demons wanted to exist in the modern world, they would have to use him as a reference. As a human path cultivator, he didn't want to open this door easily. However, he could sense that the indescribable things in the reverse dimension of heaven and earth were constantly circulating, and they had accumulated an unimaginable whaley. Even if he didn't do this, the barrier between the two worlds and the modern world would collapse sooner or later. Once the two worlds were connected, countless extraterrestrial demons would charge into the primordial sea of void in the most violent way possible. It would undoubtedly lead to an extremely violent collision and conflict, and it would definitely lead to a great calamity. On the contrary, if he could take the initiative and not let the barrier completely collapse, he might be able to slow down the situation by slowly releasing its power. He had originally planned to try and resolve this matter when his cultivation was higher, but it seemed like he had no choice now. Once his Dharma body of strength path reached the 7th transformation, he could guide those extraterrestrial demons that were originally neither good nor evil, and make them take the initiative to find Bai Wei and the others. He could then borrow their power to resist this flood. This way, not only could he avoid the calamity to the greatest extent, he could also use the power of countless demons to drown those Khanate demons. Thinking of this, he no longer hesitated. He slammed his arm horizontally, and with a rumble, the entire Scarlet Continent instantly collapsed. One punch broke the barrier of heaven and earth, and billions of extraterrestrial demons crossed the sky. Chapter 1710. Zhang Yan had shattered the barrier of the world with a single punch, causing the Crimson Continent to collapse. However, the shattered fragments didn't vanish because of this. Instead, they transformed into countless obscure and indescribable objects, and they fused into his body along with the indescribable objects that surged towards him like a tide. In that instant, he'd made up for the missing link in his advancement to the 7th cycle of the divine contract. Suddenly, the aura on his body rose, and it rose layer by layer. Previously, the indescribable things poured in from outside, but this time, he took the initiative to absorb them. However, the amount of Whaley he needed to inject was too great. If he wanted to reach this realm, he could not achieve it in a short period of time. Therefore, he could not see the end of it in a short period of time. However, he felt that once he succeeded, as long as he was willing to stay here, he would be the Crimson Continent, the barrier of heaven and earth. At the same time, many things poured into his mind, allowing him to comprehend many mysteries that he had never known before. 12 powerful consciousnesses were born in the reverse of heaven and earth. Every single one of them was placed in the void primordial sea, and the power of their divine abilities was not inferior to that of a true young expert. Back then, when he was at the 5th transformation, the 12 demonic figures he saw were the manifestations of the demonic figures. However, these demonic figures were impermanent, and that was only their external appearance. Only their will that had existed since ancient times was the only thing that did not change. It was unknown how many times they had changed internally, especially the manifestation that had fused with him. Now that the barrier of heaven and earth was broken, he naturally replaced that consciousness. However, regardless of whether it was the positive or negative heaven and earth, the power of tribulation would wear them down. In the past, it had been contained, but now that the barrier of heaven and earth was broken, several consciousnesses perished due to the tribulation, leaving only 6 existences. Among them, 3 consciousnesses leaped into the void primordial sea along with the countless heavenly demons. Although the heaven and earth had suddenly changed, the demon phantoms mostly remained the same as before. This was because the path of heaven and earth had just now opened, and those indescribable things had accompanied it. This generation was still immersed in it, so it was still the same as before. Only when these indescribable things receded and disappeared, and in order to stay in the void for a long time, would some sort of change occur. Because Zhang Yan was the first demon master after the barrier of heaven and earth was opened, the demon phantoms would use his body as a reference. Right now, he was using this to guide the demon phantoms to where the Khanate demon was. However, at this time, he realized that this was not only his own will, but also the demon phantom's will. It was the will, and the demon phantoms would also be the world's will. It phantom's will. It was because Zhang Yan's demon phantoms will that. This had nothing to do Chen and Tian. Now Bu earth and heaven, and Yen and Zhang, and the demon phantoms will and sea, and worlds, and earth, and demons. The 3 demon masters' consciousnesses also swept the demon phantoms like an ocean and headed straight for where the Khanate demon was. Zhang Yan sighed inwardly when he saw this. If the human Tao was still the ruler of the world, once the barrier of heaven and earth was opened, all the human Tao cultivators in the world would be needed to resolve this crisis. But now that the demon phantoms had the upper hand, they had no choice but to take action. Indeed, the world was unpredictable, and the mysteries of heaven were hard to predict. The breaking of the barrier between the 2 worlds was a huge event, and Bai Wei and the rest had naturally sensed it. Their expressions turned grave, because an unprecedented sense of danger had risen in their hearts at this moment. Bai Wei calculated in his heart and immediately realized that something was wrong. He cautiously said, "Everything in the world has reversed, and the world is changing. An external calamity will fall upon us and cut off our lives. This is clearly coming for us. Sky sovereigns, a great enemy is coming. You must be careful." Qian Luo and Lu Li were both shocked and puzzled. Now that they had trapped the human Dao Yuan Zun, it would not be difficult for them to completely destroy him with just a little more effort. The mighty figures in the all heavens knew where the great enemy was coming from, but the sense of danger in their hearts could not be faked. Therefore, they took out the Dharma treasures in their hands and prepared for the coming enemy. In just a short period of a few breaths of time, the three of them suddenly felt as if countless dark and indescribable things had suddenly filled the surroundings and surrounded them. Moreover, they were ceaselessly pressing forward as if they wanted to crush them in one go. These things were shapeless and innumerable, yet they'd never seen them before. In reality, no matter what they were, as long as they had not reached the level of true yang, no matter how many there were, they would not be able to harm them in the slightest. However, they could sense that there were several enormous consciousnesses like themselves, and they also possessed endless Wei. They did not dare to be careless toward such beings. Bai Wei's expression was solemn. He had a guess in his heart. Perhaps the ominous omen he had sensed earlier was related to these things. With a thought, he immediately activated his dermic power and Yuan Qi, activating the yin-yang pure seal. In the blink of an eye, it slashed into one of the powerful consciousnesses. But then he frowned because when the treasure landed, the other party did not react at all. There was no change in the other party's aura, as if it had not been damaged in the slightest. He could not help but feel a chill in his heart. He could not see through the reason of this for a moment, so he transmitted a message with his divine decree. Celestial Master Miao Xing quickly used the heaven and earth gourd to suppress this being. Qian Luo hesitated for a moment. If she activated this treasure, it was very likely that those people would allow Yuan Zun to escape. But when she thought about it again, these people could not threaten them in the end. If they did not deal with these things properly, then it might be a calamity. She was also aware of the importance of this place, so she activated the heaven and earth overturn gourd and instantly enveloped this entire region of space. In this way, all the changes in the aura here were under her control. Lu Li took Lu Yuan's golden bell, but he felt that this treasure was not suitable for him. If he was not careful, he might implicate Bai Wei and Qian Luo, so he did not activate it. Instead, he chanted a great incantation and continuously released clear light to kill the extraterrestrial demons that approached him. But no matter what they did, the three strong consciousnesses were like unmoving reefs. No matter how much they scoured them, they were not affected in the slightest. The pressure in the surroundings continued to increase. In reality, these demon master consciousnesses were completely acting on instinct at this moment. They did not have any battle experience and did not know how to deal with the Tao artifact. From the beginning until now, they had been passively enduring it. It was just that they could not be maintained by a common consciousness. Inside, there was change at every moment. Killing any one of them was useless. Moreover, because of the reason that they were born and extinguished in a flash, no matter whether you killed them or not, they would die in the next moment and then be born again. But although they were constantly rising and falling, their power was real, unless this power was directly eliminated. But since the existence of the reversal of heaven and earth, this Wei had been accumulating. At this moment, it was released all at once. How could they eliminate it completely in a short period of time? Even if the Tai golden bead attacked at this moment, there was no way to stop such a mighty force. At this moment, Zhang Yan stood in front of the barrier of heaven and earth with his hands behind his back, watching everything coldly. As the unknown thing poured into his body, his own qi activity continued to rise, and behind him, the endless tide of extraterrestrial demons surged. These devils of his were incredibly powerful, and there was no end to them. If they were left to their own devices, they would definitely endanger other living beings. The more extraterrestrial devils Bai Wei and the others killed, the smaller the harm they would cause in the future. In the depths of the void, after Zhang Yan left, Dan Yi and the others had been quietly waiting for the change that he spoke of. In the instant that the barrier of two worlds broke, they had sensed a danger that they had never seen before. But in this, there was clearly a trace of life, and it seemed to be very beneficial to them. Michihito Ichido raised his voice slightly and said with certainty, "I'm afraid this is the change that fellow Zhang spoke of." Fu Qingming calculated for a moment, and also nodded. As they spoke, Michihito Ichido made a sound of surprise. He calculated for a moment, and his expression brightened up, saying, "We have already escaped from the restraint of that heaven and earth upside-down gourd." When Dan E heard this, he also tried to sense it, and after a long time he said, "It is indeed so. I don't know what those demons are fighting with, but it must be because of this that they have no time to care about us." Fu Qingming pondered and said, "If we go now, can we take this opportunity to eliminate these demons?" Michihito Ichito calculated again and said with a solemn expression, "We don't know what those things are, and they seem to be things that have never appeared in the void essence sea before. It's hard to know if they are friend or foe, so it's not a good time to go forward now." Danny thought for a moment and said, "If fellow Zhang is here, you might know what they are." As they spoke, a familiar spirit came over and said, "Fellow Taoists, how are you?" The three of them felt it, and they couldn't help but be shocked. Danny said joyfully, "Is it fellow Zhang? Are the changes in the outside world caused by you?" Zhang Yan replied, "It is indeed related to I." Michihito Ichito said curiously, "But what are those things? Where did they come from? We have never seen them before." Zhang Yan paused for a moment and then said, "Those things are called extraterrestrial demons, and they came from outside the void essence sea." He came down and gave a rough description of these demons. Of course, he hid the demon trove and the changes in strength, but he said that these things have been accumulating for a long time, and sooner or later, they will rush into the void. Now that the demons have gained power, he broke the barrier and used this generation to eliminate the disaster. In the end, he said, "It's just that these demons are neither good nor evil, and can't be restrained. Now that the barrier between the two worlds has been opened, there is no possibility of it being closed again." In the future, all living beings, be it demons or humans, will have to face this generation, and this is also the future disaster that I mentioned. Danny listened and said in a serious tone, "According to what fellow Taoists said, since it's unstoppable, sooner or later the two worlds will be connected, then what fellow Taoist did isn't wrong, but it's a meritorious deed for us." Fu Qingming agreed and said, "Previously, we said that no matter what the future disaster is, we are willing to bear it together with fellow Taoist, and we will not let fellow Taoist bear this alone. If we can get through this, we will work together with fellow Taoists to eliminate this disaster." Michihito Ichito also said, "Fellow Taoists, we can discuss these things later. What should we do now? Should we go forward and kill those few innate demons?" Zhang Yan said, "We don't need to go forward now. If the extraterrestrial demon's momentum is endless, even if these innate demons are lucky enough to get through this, they will be exhausted and won't be able to fight against me. By then, we can subdue this generation." Chapter 1711. Zhang Yan suggested to watch the battle from the outside and look for an opportunity. This was because if he went up now, he would be sharing some of the pressure with the Khanate demons. The otherworldly demons saw him as one and would not deliberately target him. However, they would not treat Dan E and the others as their own kind. If there was a conflict, it would be a small matter. Who knew if the other three consciousnesses hidden deep within the reverse of heaven and earth would also be drawn out? If that happened, there would be even more chaos. He had a feeling that the opportunity of the three consciousnesses was not in the present but in the distant future. As long as he did not add more fuel to the fire, they would not be alarmed. At the same time, he did something else. He summoned his incarnation and ordered it to go to Bu Su Tian to see if there were any traps left by the demons. If it was convenient, it could occupy the place first. After a long time, the incarnation sent a message back. There were also layers of barriers there, and it was difficult to find a way out. It was clear that the demons had made preparations in Bu Su Tian before coming out. Seeing this, he knew that this matter could not be done for the time being. Fortunately, as long as he could kill the demons outside, any situation could be slowly resolved in the future. Therefore, he decided to wait and not make a move. The three of them waited. In the blink of an eye, dozens of years passed. Even though Bai Wei and the others had fought for so long, their auras did not diminish at all. It was normal for true Yang peers to fight for hundreds or even thousands of years. This level of intensity was still within their endurance. However, they also discovered that these things that they were fighting with could not be killed at all. Even the ordinary creatures at the outermost layer could not be killed. Moreover, the most troublesome thing was that there was nowhere for them to retreat to, nowhere to hide. Just now, the three of them tried to move through the void. However, the three consciousnesses were also wily. No matter where they went, they would immediately find them. Not only that, even the dark things in the depths would follow them. It was as if the two were originally one. Bai Wei's thoughts were the most serious. He believed that there was no way out if this continued. He said with a divine will, "Heavenly venerables, these things must have a source. If we do not cut it off, we cannot kill them." Qian Luo said, "The place where we are fighting is only at the border, yet these creatures are already so difficult to provoke. If we get closer to the source, it is likely that their strength will be even greater. I'm afraid we won't be able to quell them." Lu Li said, "I think primogenitor Guangxing is right. If we don't do this, we won't be able to get rid of these things. Ever since we left the Bu Su heaven, we have been through 3 battles. I don't know how long it will take. Even though the 9 transformations green goblet can help me, there will come a time when I run out of energy. You have to know that there are still people outside. Yuan Zun hasn't surrendered yet. I'm afraid he's watching on the side." Speaking of which, with how turbulent the demonic tide was, even the countless void realms would be destroyed by it. Fortunately, they were great true young cultivators and had things that could replenish their vitality, so they were able to hold on for so long without suffering any damage. Bai Wei said in a low voice, "The timing of these creatures' appearance is too coincidental. I suspect that it has something to do with the Yuan Zun of the human Tao." Qian Luo said, "If things really can't be done, then how should we deal with it?" Bai Wei was silent for a moment, then said, "If this deduction is true, then my million years of painstaking planning will be in vain. But don't forget, we still have a way. Even if we reach the critical juncture, we can still slightly turn the situation around. At the very least, we will just have to start all over again." Hearing his words, the two of them nodded. Then they channeled their mana and followed the flow of qi to the source. With one look, Zhang Yan knew what their goal was, but he didn't stop them. The accumulation of the reverse of heaven and earth was almost endless. Just now, the 2 worlds were connected, and the sudden outpouring of power was even more endless. Cutting off this source was not wrong, but it was very unrealistic. Because if they were to fight against the reverse of heaven and earth, even if they had the Tai golden bead in their hands, they would still be unable to stop it. As soon as Bai Wei and the other 2 sensed where the source was, they had already landed in front of the barrier of heaven and earth. But here, just now, they discovered that there seemed to be a gap in the primordial sea of void. These creatures were surging out from an indescribable place, and their numbers could be said to be endless. As long as they didn't have the heaven-mending technique, they would be powerless to reverse the situation. There would never be the possibility of cutting off the flow of the source. Moreover, they could also feel that, just behind them, there seemed to be an even more powerful qi that was accumulating power and waiting, and had yet to come out. Seeing this situation, the 3 of them immediately understood that this path was already blocked. It was impossible to go any further. Otherwise, no one could predict the deviation of the situation. Lu Li said, "Heavenly Lord Guangxing, what should we do now?" Bai Wei thought for a moment, then said, "I hold the eternal curse lineage. In the current situation, I can only ask the 2 heavenly lords to chant the superior scriptures with me and try to use it to purify them." Lu Li and Qian Luo heard this and agreed in unison. The superior scriptures had the ability to purify foreign beings, but this was not something that could be done casually. The other party had to truly benefit from it and acknowledge it in their hearts. Only then would they be able to accept the installation of the Tao. Fortunately, after fighting for so long, the 3 of them had come to understand that these creatures that they were fighting against did not have a true self. All of their actions were based on instinct. What was instinct? It was just following benefits. In other words, this generation was like a blank piece of paper. No matter what the purpose was, to the extraterrestrial demons, this was a real benefit for them. Once they accepted this method and used it to enter the Tao, they would naturally acknowledge them. Not only would they not be enemies with them, they could even use this generation to fight against their own kind. If their luck was good, they could purify 1 or 2 strong consciousnesses. Then, not only would they be able to deal with the current situation, even if Yuan Zun of the human Tao were to come at them at this moment, it would not be difficult to deal with them. The 3 of them made up their minds. They all put on solemn expressions and focused their minds to observe their bodies. Their faces were solemn as they formed hand seals and chanted the fundamental scriptures. In an instant, the void was filled with brilliance. The rainbow was gorgeous, and all kinds of profound methods and theories were displayed along with the chanting. When the nearby extraterrestrial demons were illuminated by the brilliance, they were enlightened. They all changed and showed all kinds of wonderful appearances. One by one, they bowed their heads and worshipped. There were even devout ones who stood below and performed the etiquette of a disciple. As they comprehended the scriptures, their cultivation was also gradually improving. There were uncountable trillions of extraterrestrial demons in the periphery. One batch purified, another batch would come. As time passed, the 2 sides began to kill each other. But from the beginning to the end, the 3 powerful consciousnesses were not affected at all. Since the beginning of all things, countless extraterrestrial demon obsessions had been condensed. Now, after being tempered by the tribulation power of the 2 worlds, under the changes of the heavens, they had already decided on their final destination. It was not something that could be shaken by a few scriptures. The 3 of them also noticed this, but they did not want to give up so easily. So, they continued to chant the high-tier Tao, resisting the attacks from the outside while trying to wear down the consciousnesses. This battle was in a deadlock. Dozens of years passed like this. Including the extraterrestrial demons, it had been 100 years since they arrived. Within the reverse of heaven and earth, the Weili inside Zhang Yan's body had been accumulating for 100 years. His aura had also gradually climbed to the peak. Right now, as long as he was willing, he could try to break through at any time. But if he wanted to enter the 7th revolution of strength path, he had to do it here. Because at that moment, he would need to devour even more unknown things. But right now, he did not plan to succeed. Instead, he planned to postpone it. Because the moment he succeeded, it would be like if the Qi Lu was established again. Even if the barrier between the 2 worlds could no longer be closed, the momentum of the extraterrestrial demons entering this world would be greatly reduced. In that case, the pressure on Bai Wei and the others would be greatly reduced. In fact, the extraterrestrial demons would not attack them anymore. Instead, they would try to break through this barrier. So, as long as the Xiantian demons were not destroyed, he would not take this step. Just as he was thinking, he suddenly heard a rumble. He felt that the momentum of the extraterrestrial demons entering had increased by several times. This was not unrelated to him. Those unknown things were entrusted by the extraterrestrial demons. In order to reach the 7th stage, he had actually snatched many of them. Moreover, he was the first demon lord in the world. Although this should be in the future, these demonic things originally covered the past and the future. They were instinctively attracted to him and drew close to him. It was equivalent to them intercepting him unintentionally. Now that he was no longer accumulating his cultivation and did not take any action, the momentum of this generation increased greatly. At this moment, as the momentum of the extraterrestrial demons became even more turbulent, Bai Wei and the others were no longer as calm as before. Even the demonic things that had been purified the earliest had suffered great casualties. Not even 1 out of 100 survived. What was even more dangerous was that because the 3 consciousnesses had received such strong support, the power they displayed was greater than before. Moreover, they did not fear death, so it was even more difficult for them to deal with them. Among the 3, Lu Li's situation was the worst. He did not wield offensive artifacts like Bai Wei and Qian Luo, and Lu Yuan's golden bell did not seem to have any effect on the demonic things. In most situations, he could only rely on his own strength to fight against the extraterrestrial demons. During this time, he was accidentally killed by the 3 demon lord consciousnesses. Although he borrowed the power of the mysterious beginning sun mirror and quickly returned, he had consumed a great deal of vitality. Normally, this was not much. However, after several battles, there was almost no rest in between. The 9 transformations Green Goblet was gradually unable to keep up with the consumption rate of the 3. He had to speak up. 2 Sky Venerables, if the Green Goblet is unable to provide support, then I can only borrow vitality from the future. Qian Luo frowned and said, even if we can invite Taoist Tai, we cannot take this step. Activating the Tai Golden Pearl would at most damage the foundation. However, if they borrowed vitality from the future, then their actions in the future would be bound to the one and only future. From then on, they could only follow the rules. If they deviated even the slightest bit, then they would immediately perish in the present world, never to return. That was the worst plan of all. Lu Li said, even if we invite Taoist Tai over, I'm afraid it will be difficult to solve the problem in front of us. Qian Luo said, we can suppress what we see in front of us and then temporarily hide in Busu Tian. This will give us some leeway to make arrangements. As long as we guard the border pass, we may be able to defend against the enemy outside. Bai Wei shook his head and denied, don't forget the human Dao's Yuan Zun. He must be waiting on the side for an opportunity to make a move. He will not allow me to escape so easily. He paused as if he had made up his mind. At this point, the situation is already very disadvantageous to me. In order to protect myself, although I am unwilling, I have to make that choice. Chapter 1712. When Qian Luo heard this, he pondered for a moment, then he looked up and said, Guangxing Tianzuan, we have no choice but to do so. Our current predicament is that we are exhausted after fighting for a long time. The 9 revolving Green Goblet can't stop and we won't retreat into Busu Tian. Why don't we delay a little? We might be able to outlast these foreign creatures. By some time, Lu Li thought of something and said, Celestial Lord Miao Xing wants to use the spiritual world Rui in my hand? Qian Luo said, yes, with this treasure, I might be able to rest for a while. Bai Wei always knew when to give up. If he knew it was impossible, he wouldn't hold on to it. He could feel the demon crowd was endless and he could use the spiritual world Rui to make a wish. They wouldn't be able to handle it either. However, since the 2 of them didn't want to give up and wanted to try again, he couldn't say no. He said, all right. Lu Li took the spiritual world Rui. This time, he made a wish so that the extraterrestrial demons couldn't get close so they could have a moment of peace. His mind was focused, but he didn't expect that this time, the magic treasure required an extremely large amount of energy. He was already a bit weak, but this time, he almost used up all his energy, causing him to go back to life. Bai Li and Qian Luo were prepared. Now that they saw him, they immediately transferred vital qi to him, allowing him to hold on. Lu Li felt a glow in his hand and the treasure flew away. He knew it was a success and relaxed a little. As long as he could fulfill his wish, it was worth it. Dan Yi and the others had been watching the battle. It wasn't hard to tell the demon's predicament. However, they didn't act rashly. For one, they could still fight. Whether it was the Tai Golden Bead or the Tao artifact, they couldn't fight head-on. Secondly, the extraterrestrial demons were stronger than just now, so they couldn't enter the battlefield easily. Michihito Ichido sighed. The power of these extraterrestrial demons is that they are endless. No wonder they can put these innate demons in such a difficult situation. Fu Qingming's expression was still solemn as he said, that's all. Those demons still have the connate cardinal treasures that they haven't asked for. Who knows, they might be able to use them to escape. Michihito Ichido shook his head and said, even if he has a treasure, it will only solve the problem temporarily. Even if he can hide in Busu Tian, he may not be able to avoid it. He had already seen clearly that the extraterrestrial demons could move as they pleased under the guidance of the 3 consciousnesses. Even if Bai Wei and the others escaped into Busu Tian, they would still be caught. Even if they could use the formation to defend themselves, there were just too many of them. No matter what formation they used, it would not take long for them to be overwhelmed. This would only delay them for a while, but it would not solve the problem at its root. Even if it really reached that step, they wouldn't continue to sit and watch. It wouldn't be too difficult for them to give it a push and find a way to destroy the formation even faster. Dan Yi pondered for a while and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, how long will the demonic tide last?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "According to I's calculation, the demonic tide is far from stopping. This is just the beginning, it's hard to say when it will stop. Just like the current situation, it will at least last for a few decades." Dan Yi estimated and deduced, based on the current situation of the demons, they won't be able to hold on for long unless there's a special situation. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "We can't rely on these demons to kill them. If there's a suitable opportunity, we still have to act in time. Otherwise, there might be some changes." Dan Yi agreed. The Khanate demons looked like they were at a disadvantage, but they were actually very calm and had a certain level of confidence. Who knows, they might have other powerful tricks up their sleeves other than the Tai golden bead. Now that the demons were charging at the front, they indeed didn't have to rush to join the battle, but if there was a chance, they would act decisively. At this moment, along with the appearance of the spirit world scepter, a spiritual screen spread out, enveloping Bai Wei's group of 3 and the sky demons that had submitted to them. After that, it was like a wave that slowly spread out. Most of the demons seemed to be blocked by something. Although they kept surging forward, they couldn't get close. Only the demon master's consciousness wasn't hindered, but it was useless for them to rush forward. The figures of Bai Wei and the others seemed to be illusory and couldn't be truly touched. It was as if they had transcended beyond the world. The 3 demons didn't know how long the Rui could protect them, so they took the opportunity to chant the fundamental sutra to adjust their vitality. At the same time, an object flew out from the top of their heads. It looked like it was carved out of green jade, with dragons and phoenixes sitting on it. Clear air rose from the edge of its mouth and there was a tinkling sound, like the sound of spring water flowing in the valley. This was the 9-turn green goblet. This treasure was connected to their fundamental sutra, so they only needed to chant the incantation to recover. It was just that they had been using it when they fought against Lu Lin and the others, and after the continuous battles, they didn't have much power left. Now that they had this opportunity, they could use it again. On the other hand, the heavenly demons that had been purified by the side had unknowingly received even more benefits. However, no matter how high their cultivation had increased, they were not of much use in this true yang battle. However, if they managed to survive this battle, they would undoubtedly become the most devoted disciples of the 3 of them. However, under the attack of countless heavenly demons, the spiritual world Rui couldn't hold on for long. In less than 100 breaths, the spiritual light faded and disappeared. Zhang Yan was originally watching the battle, but at this moment he suddenly felt something. He glanced and saw the Rui coming towards him. After one side used it, it would fall where the opponent was. Just now, the Rui was being used towards the heavenly demons, so it naturally came towards him. He raised his hand and caught it, but he didn't expect that the Rui would still end up in his hands. After thinking for a while, he put it into his sleeve. This treasure was mysterious, and the outcome was still uncertain. Maybe there would be a time when it would be useful. He turned around and cast his gaze back at the battlefield, secretly activating his secret technique. From the beginning, he had been looking for a chance to kill them. Among the 3 Khanate demons, Bai Wei's Tao was the most profound, and he was the most decisive. It was extremely difficult to kill him in one go. Lu Li had the mysterious beginning yang mirror painting. As long as he provided this magic tool with endless vitality, it would be useless to kill him a few times. Since he didn't take either of them, then there was only one target left. As for the Khanate demons, the 3 of them didn't expect the spiritual world Rui to retreat so quickly. Without any cover, they could only rely on their own strength to resist the many heavenly demons that were pressing towards them and continue to hold on with the vitality that they had just now recovered. Qian Luo, on the other hand, gradually felt that something was wrong. In the battlefield, when facing the heavenly demons, which were invisible and couldn't be killed, only the heaven and earth upside-down gourd in her hand could be of some use. But after this battle, she found that the effect of this magic tool was gradually declining, as if it was being disturbed by something. Previously, she only thought that it was caused by her lack of vitality, but now that she still had this feeling, she knew that there must be a problem here. There seemed to be some kind of ancient monster in the surroundings that could continuously reduce the power of the Dao tool. This was actually caused by the repeated scouring of the unknown objects and heavenly demons. It was difficult for true young mighty cultivators to endure external tribulations. No matter how the outside world changed, they would not be affected. However, it was different for Dao tools. The heaven and earth intersected, and the universe changed because of it. Even if it couldn't be destroyed, it needed the master to refine it again. Only then could it display its original power. Just now, the spiritual world Rui was also like this. It only lasted for a short while before escaping. Originally, she thought that after recovering a little, she could continue to hold on, and maybe she could exhaust these things. But now it seemed that not only could this wish not be realized, but the situation she faced was even worse than before. At this time, no matter how unwilling she was, she could only give up on her original perseverance. So she sighed faintly and said, "Guangxing Tianzuan, now that things have come to this, it seems that we can only make that choice." Bai Wei seemed to have seen this coming. She nodded and asked again, "What does Guangxing Tianzuan mean?" Lu Li said, "Guangxing Tianzuan can make the decision." Bai Wei said solemnly, "In that case, I will need to use my Dao skill later. Please protect me. Even though it will only be for a moment, we must not be careless." Lu Li and Qian Luo hurriedly agreed. Bai Wei restrained her qi and placed the pure yang yin-yang on top of her head. At this time, if there was an enemy coming, the treasure would sense the qi and kill them. She then closed her eyes. At this moment, Lu Li suddenly felt a surge of qi falling on him. He could not help but change his expression. This was clearly a sign that the opponent's art of slaying was about to be activated. He just now guessed that Zhang Yan might take the opportunity to attack Bai Wei, but he didn't expect it to be aimed at him again. Even though he had the map of origin, he didn't want to waste spiritual opportunity for nothing. He quickly calmed his mind and thought of a way to avoid it. The three of them were connected. As soon as Lu Li felt threatened, Qian Luo also felt it. She hurriedly used the heaven and earth overturn gourd and tried to protect the two of them. As they retreated, the three demon master consciousnesses outside seemed to have sensed something as well. Suddenly, their attacks quickened. She was fighting 3 against 1, and instantly, she couldn't hold on any longer. She hurriedly activated her vital qi and finally managed to hold on. However, at this moment, she suddenly felt a sense of danger. She could not help but feel shocked. Previously, she had received the message from Bai Wei and Lu Li, so she immediately knew what this meant. She hurriedly used her art of retreat. However, one side responded hastily and the other side had been preparing for a long time. She could not successfully avoid it. She saw a flash of golden light in front of her. With a loud bang, she had already turned into nothingness, leaving only a yellow-skinned gourd floating in the void. Lu Li said in shock, "Miao Xing Tianzuan?" Just now, Bai Wei had finished circulating his art. When he saw this, his expression also darkened. He sighed heavily and said, "We were still a step too late." Zhang Yan killed Qian Luo in one move and retracted his qi. He slowly adjusted his qi. Of the 4 demons, 2 had been killed and the others were trapped by the demonic creatures. Their chances of victory had greatly increased. If things went smoothly, it would not be difficult for them to kill all of them. As he was thinking, he felt something strange. He raised his eyebrows and looked in a direction. On the side of Dan Yi and the other 2, they also felt something strange. They could not help but look up and saw a golden-robed Taoist they had never seen before. His qi was obscure and it was difficult to see his depth. Dan Yi asked warily, "May I know who you are, sir?" The golden-robed Taoist stood proudly in the void and looked down. He looked at everyone and said, "My name is Tai. Speaking of which, I've come to know you all once." Chapter 1713. Tai. The expressions of Dan Yi and the other 2 froze. Just by hearing the name, it wasn't hard to guess the person's identity. The person standing in front of them was the incarnation of the Tai golden bead. However, they were a little confused. They knew that Khanate cardinal treasures did have their own consciousness, but they didn't have a true spirit or a dharma body. Although they could show their appearance in front of some low-level cultivators, that was because the gap between them was too big. That was why they could change their auras. However, in front of true yang cultivators, they couldn't show themselves like that unless they placed their consciousness on something. Of course, there was another possibility, which was that they had already achieved Tao. However, the person in front of them was obviously not the case. Dan Yi's expression was serious. He took a step forward and cupped his hands. "If you are that person, why have you come to find us?" Although they didn't know how they came, they didn't use the victorious heavenly ship because it was convenient for them to watch the battle from the side. If they wanted to harm them, they could escape immediately and there was no need to be afraid. Moreover, they had abandoned their master to come here, so it was doubtful how much power they could unleash. The golden-robed Taoist bowed back and said, "Today, I'm here to make peace with Taoist Bai's side." Michihito Ichito said coldly, "Make peace? Does that mean that you are here because of the Khanate demon's order?" The golden-robed Taoist said calmly, "Taoist Bai and the others are skilled, but they don't have the ability to order me around. Not to mention now, even back then in Bu Su Tian, I didn't submit to any human Tao benevolence. It's just that Taoist Bai and the others have interacted with me before and we got along well, so I'm here to make peace." Dan Yi and the other two looked at each other. It seemed like the Khanate demon used some kind of technique to be able to incarnate. However, they were sure that the Tai golden bead was only willing to accept it just now. Otherwise, it wouldn't have landed on the Khanate cardinal treasure. Michihito Ichito sneered and said, "There are only 2 of them left, and they can't even protect themselves. We just need to wait until they are exhausted, and then we can annihilate them. Why should we make peace with them?" The golden-robed Taoist chuckled and shook his head. "Fellow Taoists, I'm sure you've seen it for yourself. These creatures that came from beyond the heavens are clearly the enemies of all living beings in the world. If you and fellow Taoist Bai fight to the death, who will be able to stop these creatures? I'm afraid that no matter if it's demons or human cultivators, they'll all suffer because of this. Why don't we cast aside our prejudices and join hands to fight the enemy?" Fu Qingming raised his head and said in a deep voice, "There is no need for you to beat around the bush. If you have something to say, just say it." The golden-robed Taoist looked at him for a moment, then smiled and said, "Back then, when fellow Taoist Bai and the others found me, they promised to help me find the Zhou Huanyuan jade and help me achieve Tao. I promised to help them 3 times. If fellow Taoists are willing to accept this, then I can leave and no longer interfere with this matter." Danny frowned. It was impossible to help the Tai golden bead achieve Tao. Back then, the great figures of the human path looked after this Dharma treasure and sent people to guard it. One of the reasons was that they were wary of the treasure's ability. Once it achieved Tao, if it had any ulterior motives, it would be even more dangerous than the demons. Even if the other party was willing to swear an oath that they would not harm the human path, there would still be endless trouble. Because as long as the Whaley theurgy was above the human path cultivators, it could support other factions or simply take the Zhou Huanyuan jade away. That way, it would still be able to eliminate the human path factions. He said slowly, "What if we're still unwilling?" The golden-robed Taoist looked at the 3 of them and said, "If fellow Taoists don't agree, then I might have to help fellow Taoist Bai and the others get through this." The 3 of them shuddered. The meaning of this person's words was that if they did not agree, then he would no longer be limited to the 3 promises and would ask the demons to help them to the end. Michihito Ichito sneered, "Those demons are being held back by the beings from beyond the sky. Even if you help, what can you do?" The golden-robed Taoist said with a smile, "Fellow Taoists, perhaps you don't know, but fellow Taoist Bai has a method. In times of danger, he can use the pure yin-yang seal to seal himself and hide in the void. You won't be able to find him. However, this method can only help him alone, which is why I don't want to use it lightly. But if he really leaves, those beings from beyond the sky might have to be stopped by fellow Taoists." When the three of them heard this, they frowned. If that was really the case, it would really be difficult to eliminate this person. Although Tai did not say it clearly, since this person could hide, he might appear at any time and take advantage of the time when they were fighting with the extraterrestrial demons to cause trouble. If that was the case, the best situation for them would be to escape. If they were not careful, they might even lose one or two people. That would be very passive. Seeing that the three of them were silent, the golden-robed Taoist said again, "I have a suggestion here. I wonder if fellow Taoists are willing to hear it?" Dan Yi said seriously, "Please say it." The golden-robed Taoist said, "Now that there is a great enemy outside, if the two families fight too much, it will only benefit others. You all have an endless lifespan, why do you need to fight for a day?" Dan Yi said, "What do you mean?" The golden-robed Taoist said, "In my opinion, all of you are almighty in the world. With a thought, you can rise and destroy the world. Why do you need to fight personally? All of you have disciples, why don't you borrow their hands in the future to fight? This way, it will not hurt the harmony, and it will not cause harm to the living beings in the world." Michihito Ichido sneered and said, "Are you joking? By doing this, could it be that they intend to entrust their lives to the hands of their juniors? How ridiculous!" The golden-robed Taoist smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, you misunderstood. I don't want to fight for my life with this method, I want to fight for the great Tao with this method." Fu Qingming said in a deep voice, "What do you mean by that?" The golden-robed Taoist said with a serious expression, "In my opinion, the fight between the two families is just a fight between orthodoxies. At the end of the day, it will still fall on the Zhou Huanyuan jade. If we get it, we will prosper, if we lose it, we will fall. Even I am here for this item. If that is the case, why don't we use this item as a stake in our fight? Every time this item appears in the world, we can have a fight between our disciples. This way, the winner will have the upper hand for a while, and the loser will not necessarily fall. We can find another chance next time." The three of them thought about it and felt that this method was feasible. The main thing was, as Tai said, they could not kill Bai Wei and the others. Instead, they had to guard against them coming out and messing up the situation. Dan Yi felt that this was a very important matter. Zhang Yan was not here, so he could not make a direct judgment. So, after a brief discussion with Fu Qingming and Dan Yi, he contacted Zhang Yan and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, do you see the situation here?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "I already know. What do you think, fellow Taoists?" At this moment, Fu Qingming said, "I think it's not impossible for us to stop here, but the fiendish demons must admit that they have lost this battle and hand over everything that can threaten us. They must also swear an oath that they will not make things difficult for us humans in the future, apart from the fight for Origin Jade." Michihito Ichido also said, "That's right. If the demons are willing to agree to this, then we can take a step back for now." Zhang Yan could not help but think. He knew very well that even if Bai Wei and the others could not escape with the power of the Tai Golden Bead, they would not be able to win if it really helped them with its full power. Perhaps after achieving the seventh transformation body, with the support of an endless supply of unknown items, they might be able to resist this treasure. But once he succeeded, the demons from beyond the realm might very well turn around and attack him. That way, the suppression on Bai Wei and the others would no longer exist, and they would be able to escape. Therefore, they could not rely on this to fight the enemy for now. The only things they could really rely on were these. Actually, they could still think of a way to solve this. It was not impossible to fight, but there was a key point here. If the Tai Golden Bead could help Bai Wei and the others this time, then it might be able to turn to the demons from beyond the realm next time. This was a great threat. After thinking deeply, he said, "Tai is neither human nor demon, and his heart belongs to no one. If we do not agree to him, even if the demons are killed by me, they may be used by the demons from beyond the realm. We must guard against this. I think that we can act according to your wishes, but we must ask this person to agree to fight against the demons with me. Otherwise, there is no need to talk anymore. It is just a battle." Dan Yi nodded repeatedly. Michihito Ichido also said, "That is how it should be." The four of them discussed for a while longer before retreating from the divine wills. Danny raised his head and said, "Out of respect for Sir, we can make peace with him. However, there are a few conditions." The golden-robed Taoist said, "If that is so, it is the fortune of all living beings. How about this? I will invite fellow Taoist Bai over for a talk." Danny nodded and said, "Yes." Bai Wei and Lu Li were still dealing with the demons from beyond the realm. Suddenly, they received a message from Tai, and both of them perked up. Bai Wei said in a low voice, "It seems that the matter is half done. It was not in vain that I used the spell to lure this one out. The reason why the Tai golden bead could incarnate was because of his previous spell. One had to know that the future had endless changes. After they promised to provide the primordial treasure with the Zhou Huanyuan jade, there was a glimmer of the future. In this future, it was the one who obtained the Tao. Therefore, by borrowing the foundation spell, this glimmer of the future was triggered, and it fell into the present world. However, as long as it did not reach that moment, the future would not be transformed into reality. Therefore, this incarnation of Tai did not have any Weili. If it wanted to launch its power, it still needed to borrow the master's hand, and it could not rely on itself. However, after it came out, it could understand that they were in a relationship of mutual use. If they were destroyed by Yuan Zun of the human Tao, then no one would give him the Zhou Huanyuan jade, so they would definitely stand on their side. However, it was difficult for them to know what the incarnation of Tai would do. Now it seemed that it was a situation of peace, and there might be some price to pay. Although this result was not the best, it was not the worst, and they could accept it. Bai Wei told Lu Li a few words, and told him to be careful in dealing with the demons. Then he made up his mind, and guided a wisp of vitality to form a shadow, and followed the chi of Tai to shine beside him. Seeing Dan Yi and the other two, he bowed and said, "Greetings, Yuan Zun. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.